They gaped at each other, then fell silent, mouths open as they stared at the figure hovering in midair. David had ripped Karasin up from the deep with gravity. As a deep-sea troll, it should be weaker out of the water, he'd said, not just to explain, but to make his point. If he wanted to, using that sacred trident and his power, he could wipe Atlantis from the map. The hint was clear. If they didn't want their city destroyed, they had better cooperate. Karasin's massive body slammed onto the island. The impact shuddered the heavens and shook the ground. For a moment, the two of them could barely stand and were forced to stumble backward. The whole isle was scarcely larger than the beast's bulk. Its canyon-like maw was right in front of them. They could smell the stench from its open mouth. The beast roared, a sound that shattered the floating clouds and made the luminous geode crystals tremble. 1,000-meter tentacles lashed through the air, aiming straight for David. This ant dragged from its lair had to be crushed. Gales whipped the sky as the octopus-like limbs sliced through it, blowing pterosaurs away like paper dolls. David planted himself and absorbed the incoming kinetic force with a combination of gravity manipulation and sheer will, standing like an unmoving mountain. Where the tentacle struck, a circular blast of air exploded outward. Mara, hair wild, who'd retreated into the water, threw up a curtain of current to shield herself and Queen Atlana, but even that barrier could not hold against the aftershocks. Water curtains dispersed into mist. Mara's chest heaved. Atlana lunged, grabbing her before the blast could sweep her away. "Thank you, Queen," Mara whispered, pale and shaken. She did not have the royal family's sturdier physique. David's eyes flared with purple heat. He cut into one of Karasin's tentacles with razor energy, dark blue blood spouting like a fountain. The wound made the creature jerk back, but a few severed meters meant nothing on a body thousands of meters long. "It's tougher than titanium," David muttered. The deep-sea monster's armor was harder than he'd expected. Fine energy rays barely phased it. Then David moved. He shattered the sound barrier, rocketing forward like a living cannonball. The blast of his motion howled through the air. His fist struck, and the mountain-sized head snapped back as if hit by another mountain. Karasin staggered and lashed wildly with massive limbs and tentacles, its lighthouse-sized eyes blazing with fury and humiliation. Bulk made it slow. David moved like a flicker, taking blows that churned the air with ease. He countered with universe energy formed into thick cannons and blasted at Karasin's eyes. Blinding heat forced the beast to shut them. Once blinded, it became an even easier target. David combined gravity manipulation with devastating physical strikes. His strength rivaled the island-grown monsters. His speed left it behind. Explosive impacts rocked the so-called small world. For a time, the deep-sea horror was driven back and pounded until it could scarcely respond. Its fierce blows fell short of the nimble, relentless human. Karasin was no mindless beast. It understood, and it raged, frustrated that every attack was avoided and punished. It tried to turn and plunge back into the ocean, but David's gravitational tether yanked it back each time. Its pillar-like forelimbs gouged deep furrows into the island, but the damage meant nothing. Every time it tried to retreat, it was dragged forward and battered anew. The tremors threatened to tear the island apart. From the water, Mara and Atlana bobbed helplessly, watching in stunned disbelief. David had utterly suppressed the creature that had terrorized Atlantis for ages. Atlana's mind raced. She had risked so much over the trident, had faced Karasin before, and known its dire strength. She had once believed only her eldest son Arthur, with his gift to speak to sea creatures, could ever reach the trident. Not even Poseidon himself, she had thought, could handle this beast. Now she watched it shredded and broken by a single human, and the notion reshaped itself in her heart. Karasin's armored shell had been cleaved, jagged teeth flew free. Dark blue blood stained the sea. Its roars lost power, its resistance waned. David readied one final blow. He streaked across the sky, gathered every ounce of kinetic force and gravity, and smashed down. The impact was a cataclysm. Airwaves screamed for miles. The island, unable to withstand the tremors any longer, split with a thunderous crack and began to sink into the abyssal dark sea. Karasin, torn and inert, floated like a ruined toy among the waves. Its injuries were devastating. Even a single tentacle could not move. The battle that had rocked the island was over. "It's over," Mara breathed, staring at David as he hovered in the suddenly quiet air, dazed and alone. Chapter 122. Wait, there's the Queen. The earth-shaking battle was finally over. Mara had thought that with the strength David had shown, even if he couldn't match Karrasan after entering the waterfall, he could at least retreat alive, if battered. She had not expected what unfolded next. David plucked Karrasan from its deep-sea lair and dragged it through the air, beating it savagely until the creature lay gravely wounded. He hovered above the beast, looking down until it stopped struggling. Then, from a distance, he reached out as if to grasp something. Deep in the sunken throne room beneath the waves, a skeleton sat on its throne, its bones glowing with a dim golden light. The golden trident clutched in its bony hand shone brilliantly, fighting against the gravity that tried to pull it away. A faint mechanical voice, or a sensation in David's head, announced, "Anger from the remnant soul of the first king of Atlantis, plus 15. You still dare to stop me from taking the trident? Since you are dead, do not come out and cause trouble again." As David made the crushing motion through the air, a fierce force snuffed out the fragile, flame-like glow. The struggling golden light gave one mournful cry and then vanished. The skeleton crumbled to dust and scattered with the currents across the seabed. The trident cut through the water and flew into David's hand. In the sunlight-like glow, the dispersed spray refracted and painted a rainbow in the air. David, holding the sacred trident that shone like a god's scepter, hung in midair like a deity incarnate. "He really got the trident," Mara breathed, staring up with a mixture of shock and something close to awe. Everything David had said was true. He had known where the trident lay, had not bothered to retrieve it until he needed it, and then claimed it with casual ease. No bargain, no price paid, no blood spilled. Karrasan's guarded relic had simply fallen into his hands. "You've obtained the trident. What will you do now?" Atlana asked as she and Mara climbed ashore onto a broken island plate. Mara's voice trembled. David toyed with the trident, testing its weight. The material was unexpectedly hard. His pure physical strength could not bend it. It felt like an ordinary divine artifact, but with a familiar signature. "Amazon metal?" he murmured. He wondered if the so-called Poseidon's cold iron was a remnant of the war with Ares. Poseidon's shattered weapon, reforged by the Atlanteans into this trident. "As a princess of the Atlantis race, how could I not be nervous?" Mara admitted. She studied him as one would watch a supervolcano, beautiful, fearsome, and potentially world-ending. "You've shown you can overturn the ocean. Your aim is directly at the Atlanteans." David offered a half-smile. "I prefer conquest to destruction. If your people willingly submit, I won't unleash carnage." Mara bit her lip. "But if they refuse?" Her voice was small. "If I defeat their king and their army, and they still won't bend? Then don't blame me for being ruthless." Mara's warning was honest and edged with grief. She feared the consequences of defying David, and her concern for her people made the words tremble. David glanced at them, casual and untroubled. It wouldn't be hard for him to crush resistance. He had no desire for wanton slaughter. He could always build a deep-sea prison no one could escape, a place to lock up an entire nation in the lightless abyss. He would punish them without annihilating them. He could savor their impotent resentment. Still, his offhand remarks tightened Atlana and Mara with dread. They watched the young man play with their ancestors' divine relic as though it were a newly acquired toy. David lifted the trident and swung experimentally. The sea answered. Wind and cloud gathered at his gesture, and the ocean rose in towering 100-meter waves that twisted into the air. He discovered something new, the trident's unique power to create and command storms at sea, something his own abilities did not fully replicate. "This trident is finally not completely useless," he said, half to himself. He had sought the weapon as much for its legitimacy as for its power. Legitimacy silences objections. The symbol of right could be more useful than raw force. Atlana watched, face complex and strained, as waves crashed and the sky darkened. For millennia, the trident had been the symbol of imperial authority. The one who held it was the aspirant to the throne of the Seven Seas. But now it was held by an outsider, by this terrifying young man. Her people had lost the artifact, and with it, a portion of their future. "All right, time to go." David ignored their lingering fear and finished examining the trident's capabilities. With the tip, he projected power, and a familiar blue light opened on the ocean, a gravity vortex he knew how to ride. The field wrapped around Mara. David took her up, preparing to return to the world's core. "Wait, there's also the Queen!" Mara cried as they began to be drawn into the teleportation gate. Her eyes darted to Atlanta, who still stood on the broken island plate, unlifted. "Did I say I would take her with us?" David asked. Mara's confusion turned to alarm. "You chose me to handle state affairs in your absence. I am to keep Atlantis stable," he explained. "Mara has many shortcomings. She is inexperienced. Her will can be weak, but she is willing to compromise for her nation and her people. This former queen of Atlantis has been betrayed and tempered by hardship. She is different." He glanced once at Atlanta. Her face was hard, lined with bitterness and resignation. With a final look at the ex-queen, David tightened the gravity field and slipped into the vortex with Mara. The two vanished, leaving Atlanta alone on the shattered shore as the ocean roiled and the storm raged. Chapter 123. Mara, your father is calling you. David did not kill Karasin after defeating it. Although Karasin was a monster, it possessed intelligence no less than an adult's and could even communicate freely with Aquaman, consistently supplying him with emotional points. Anger from Karasin plus 108. The deep-sea troll had been powerful, but it wasn't a major player in the fate of the world. Only a little over 100 emotional points, which was better than nothing. The main course would be the Atlantean race that came next. Breaking through the water and hovering above the surface, David coldly swept his gaze over the throng of menacing trench creatures below. With a single motion of his trident, a raging tide slammed the biting horde back into the seabed. The gravity field he commanded shattered the sound barrier, pierced the atmosphere, and carried him toward Atlantis, Mara, disturbed and reluctant inside it. Pacific Ocean, seabed, Atlantis Royal Palace. The palace's pristine white grand hall, ribbed like whale bones, was sacred and majestic. Orm, radiating raw authority, sat on the throne in dazzling silver armor and a coral-shaped spiked crown. Nereus occupied a companion seat to his left. To the other side sat the king of the Fisherman Kingdom, tall, green-scaled, legless, and replaced by a thick fishtail. Below the dais, Atlantean elites in white high-tech battle armor and officers from the other tribes bowed and reported their search results. "Your Majesty, your two kings," one officer said. "We've dispatched personnel and equipment across the seas. We've searched the Red Sea, the Venetian Sea, and the Caspian. So far, there is no trace of the criminal." "Search again," Orm roared. He struck the ground with his shining silver trident like a scepter. A wave of pressure rolled through the hall. Everyone staggered, bowing their heads against the king of the seven seas' fury. "His Majesty Orm's will is our will." "We were once one people," Orm continued, his face hard as he addressed the two kings. "Though evolution divided us, we are still Atlanteans. For decades, the land dwellers have polluted our oceans and treated our home as a dumping ground. Now our princess, our future queen, has been abducted by a filthy land dweller, and her whereabouts are unknown. I propose we declare war on the land dwellers and make them pay." Over long years, Atlantis had split into 7 tribes. Besides the main Atlantean line and the Zeeble, still mostly human, and the slightly altered fishermen, the other 4 tribes had fared worse. One perished when part of the sea became like a desert, one had lost contact and vanished, one devolved into the unintelligent trench, and one turned violent and savage into the brine. The 3 kings on the dais, with their 3 great armies gathered outside the city, now spoke for nearly the entire Atlantic people. "As long as my daughter is returned safely, I will fight anyone," Nereus said. It was true he had allied his daughter to Orm to secure royal authority, but that didn't mean he didn't love her. The idea of his child kidnapped by a land dweller was intolerable. War might force the issue. "The land dwellers act like masters of the world," the Fisherman King said coldly. "I will gladly join you in educating them." "Very good." Orm laughed and rose to order the mobilization of the fleet when a guard burst in, kneeling to report, "Your Majesty, the criminal is coercing Princess Mara to appear above our city." Orm froze, face shifting between fury and disbelief. Vulko's earlier account had made the man sound like a braggart. Overturning some guards didn't mean he could seize the king. The sacred trident's whereabouts were uncertain, and that man had destroyed the recorder, saying only he knew where it was. In Orm's eyes, David was a blustering land dweller, an excuse to invade the surface. "Mobilize the army," Orm started to command, but before the order could be completed, the palace dome of deep-sea stone was torn open as if a can had been ripped from its lid. The elite warriors sprang to arms. Orm, trident in hand, looked up in fury and shock. A figure stood high above the hall, holding a golden trident and looking down like a conqueror. Beside him, obedient and composed, stood Mera, the most beautiful princess of the Seven Seas. "Mera!" Nereus shot to his feet, anxiety raw in his voice. The sound of the palace being ripped apart echoed across the seabed. All of Atlantis turned toward the intrusion. Orders went out by communicator. Guards and army units ascended above the city to encircle the intruder. David stood amid them, the trident in his grasp, calm and composed as though reviewing his troops rather than a man trapped within them. He nodded slightly. "Except for the brine, almost everyone is here," he observed. That saved him effort. The brine lived in a remote volcanic trench, and their absence was reasonable. He did not expect much from Orm. This king's power had waned, but it was enough. "Land dweller, put down your weapon and surrender at once. I will grant you a swift execution," Orm declared. Purple cape flowing in the current, trident leveled, he pointed at David with contempt. Deep disgust showed in his eyes. His mother had degraded herself by coupling with a land dweller. "You have no idea what ancient and powerful forces you have provoked. When your kind were still eating raw meat, we already ruled the world," the Fisherman King sneered. High-tech firearms capable of piercing armor were leveled at David. Nereus trained his energy-emitting trident on him as well, convinced Mera was being held inside David's gravity field and was about to be rescued by force. "Land dweller, your punishment will be swift. Release my daughter if you can." Amid the tens of thousands of troops, David smiled. Then, almost casually, he released the gravity field and allowed the water to flow back. Mera was free to return to the sea. "Mera, your father is calling you," he said. "Daughter, come quickly." Nereus called. Urgency and relief mixed in his voice as his daughter began to move toward him. Chapter 124. I am the king of the seven seas. Nereus called urgently. Mera could arrive in an instant with her power over water. On the battlefield, Orm stared at the woman who would be his queen. "Father, you should surrender. You cannot defeat him," Mera said. Nereus's eyes widened. He glared at David. "Land dweller, what have you done to my daughter?" Orm's face hardened. In front of his countless subjects, his future queen had just urged them to stand down and seemed to be helping their enemy. He could not accept it. Slowly, he gave an order to his army. "Be careful. Do not harm my queen when the battle begins. She's been mind-controlled." "She's saying the truth," Mera replied, biting her lip. She did not try to flee. What he holds in his hand is the lost sacred trident. Today's clash had brought together the armies of 3 Atlantean kingdoms, an unprecedented alliance. Yet after watching David fight Karasin, Mera, torn inside, could not believe her people could win. If defeat was inevitable, it was better not to start a war and risk total annihilation. "He is the chosen king of the 7 seas," she cried. A murmur ran through the crowd. Several eyes locked onto the trident in David's hand, a gleaming, golden weapon. The legend of the sacred trident had been passed down for generations. Whoever possessed it and gained its recognition could become king of the 7 seas, unite the oceans, and claim supreme rule. Civilians and soldiers alike remembered the story at once. "Is that the sacred trident, our strongest treasure, the one lost for thousands of years?" "Impossible. How could a land dweller win the trident's recognition?" Orm's eyes flashed cold. He waved his hand, commanding his forces. "Seize the criminal who dares challenge the great Atlantean race." Everyone snapped back to reality. David wore land dweller clothes and resisted contact with the water, nothing like an Atlantean. The sacred trident had been a legend for millennia. No outsider should be able to claim it so easily. "Charge!" Nereus and the Fisherman Kingdom's king shouted their orders at the same time. Laser guns fired. A dense wall of armed Atlantean warriors, like a school of sharks, surged toward David. "You call us land dwellers," David said, casually waving the trident. "Have you forgotten where your ancestors came from?" The water convulsed. The sea itself seemed enraged, roaring to life. Tremors rippled through the depths, currents and tides rose up like an army, and whole ranks of Atlantean soldiers, armored and strong as steel, were thrown aside. The imposing front lines scattered as people crashed into the ruins of the city, clutching wounds, faces pale with shock. The sea has been mobilized like a force. Could that really be the sacred trident? The crowd exploded into chaos. The sacred trident, lost for ages, had reappeared. Could this stranger be its chosen wielder? David, with a single motion, smashed apart the combined forces of the three kingdoms. Above the city, only a few dozen nobles, those with even the faintest royal blood, managed to stay standing. Orm dropped his arms, which had been trying to hold back the vibrating waters, his face a mix of rage and disbelief. He watched David like a predator sizing up prey. That power, if it was the trident's, was terrifying. He must have tricked Volko and hidden the real trident, Orm snarled inwardly. There's no way a land dweller could earn its recognition. Nereus stood stunned. He glanced at Mara, searching her face for answers. She shook her head painfully, signaling to her father not to resist. The trident, the Fisherman King began, disbelief on his face as he stared at the golden glow. Great, he faltered, unsure. Seizing the moment, Mara stepped forward to plead with the people, though she still did not know the man's name. Your Majesty, she called out to David, he's holding the genuine trident. I saw it. He took it from Karasen, the deep-sea troll. Karasen. The name hit the crowd like a blow. An ancient terror, as big as an island and powerful enough to level cities. Faces around the plaza drained of color. The Fisherman King hesitated, then lowered his weapon, eyes fixed on the trident's light. Nereus's worry softened. He trusted his daughter's word. Orm watched his two allies falter and, furious, signaled his elite guard to press the attack. The one recognized by the sacred trident is King of the Seven Seas, the Fisherman King warned, his tone hardening as he addressed Orm. That isn't the same as your hereditary title. Orm sneered at the warning. A wave of sea current blasted the 20 elite nobles who had charged, powerful enough to sink ships, knocking them back like reeds. They smashed into the palace and hit the stones, broken and motionless. David had only to flick the trident. Its force was world-shattering. He was also using a touch of gravity manipulation, subtly amplifying the trident's effect. Lay down your weapons, Orm, David said, voice calm. Nereus, who had been wavering, went cold. He pointed the trident straight at Orm. Cowards and fools, he said. Orm exploded with fury. He swung his own trident like a cannon blast, hurtling forward with the tip aimed at David. His eyes were fierce, his presence overwhelming. It's just an object, he roared. Even if the trident can make someone king of the seven seas, that someone should be me. Chapter 125, King of the Sea. Clang! Orm refused to yield the throne. He swung his trident straight at David. David met him with a horizontal sweep of his own trident, one-handed, and the two sacred weapons smashed together. A towering surge of water rose from the seabed like a whale's tail sweep. Orm's body was slammed backward, smashed into a corner of the palace. The display of raw divine power stunned everyone present. In their previous clash, no golden light had flared from the sacred trident, nor had the surrounding water changed. Was that strike entirely David's own strength? Orm carried the strongest Atlantean bloodline in the Seven Seas, yet even his best, most furious blow couldn't withstand a single reply from David. How could this be? Land dweller, I am the king of the seven seas, Orm howled. In the ruined hall, the silver trident bent. Orm's hands trembled. Blood seeped from the cracked skin between his thumb and forefinger into the seawater. The disheveled prince finally understood the gulf that separated him from David. Rage overtook him. With a roar, he forced his power out and charged again, gripping his trident like a madman. Orm, stop! Mara cried, stepping between them and shaping the water into a barrier to halt his futile assault. The queen had risen him as her son. If possible, she wanted to save him now. She also feared Orm's recklessness would drag her people into conflict with David. You're just like my mother, the one who was sacrificed to the trench. You betrayed your people. You betrayed me. Orm spat, eyes bloodshot. A torrent of water, strong enough to smash boulders, surged toward Mara, but Orm blasted it apart with a swing of his trident. Seeing his former fiancée aiding his enemy had driven him to blind fury. He thrust his trident at her throat, killing intent radiating from him. The gleaming tip closed in an instant. Mara spun the water into a vortex around her to deflect the point, but Orm's strike would not be so easily turned aside. After a tense stalemate, the water broke, and the trident's tip drove toward her vital spot. "Daughter," Nereus shouted, horror and fury cracking his voice. Mara felt death's breath rush in like a predator's maw. For a sliver of a second, fear crossed her face. Then the water under the trident shifted. Its flow hardened until it was as solid as steel. Orm's weapon struck an immovable wall of bronze and iron and could not advance. He strained until his veins bulged, roaring, but his trident would not move. Orm's agitation turned to alarm as he saw David raise a hand. David was manipulating the water with a gravity field, pressing it upward. Orm felt as if his trident, his arms, everything were encased in high-density alloy, squeezed by mountains from every direction. His bones creaked under the pressure. Fear flashed across Mara's face as she retreated. She had not expected David to save her. "Your tricks end here." David's voice was cold. He had already shown his power to the Atlanteans. Now the main obstacle, Orm, the usurper, had to be removed. David twisted the gravity field, wrenching Orm's head to the side with increasing force. Orm realized what was happening. His eyes widened with shock and rage. He fought back, unleashing tens of thousands of tons of force, enough to sink a submarine. But it was like a mantis trying to stop a chariot. With a sickening snap, Orm's neck twisted like brittle reed. His trident slipped from his hand and sank to the seabed. His body went limp and fell to the floor. In seconds, he was a corpse. Orm had been undeniably powerful, especially in water, his domain. Even someone like Wonder Woman, an avatar of Zeus, would be at a crushing disadvantage here. Without David's gravity manipulation, solving Orm in the sea would have been no small task. Now it was done. "From this day forward, the Atlantean people will be under my rule as David Fuse may step forward." David spoke without looking at the corpse as it drifted toward the sand. His gaze swept the room like a ruler claiming his domain. The Atlanteans bowed their heads in deference, unwilling to meet his eyes. "Your Majesty, the sacred trident has recognized you. You are the undisputed king of the sea." The king of the Fisherman Kingdom placed a hand on his chest and spoke solemnly. Nereus, who had held a position only slightly inferior to Orm, awkwardly bowed as well, his gaze flicking. He had no confidence left to resist. Yet one doubt still gnawed at him. David had not even touched the seawater. His manner wasn't at all Atlantean. If he wasn't an Atlantean, how had the sacred trident accepted him? David noticed the uncertainty in many eyes. For now, everyone was cowed by his recent crushing of the former king of the Seven Seas and dared not speak. He didn't mind. That was exactly what he wanted. After bringing Zibel and the Fisherman Kingdom under Atlantean rule, David took their kings to the Brine Kingdom. Its monarch, crab-like and brusque, saw David wield the sacred trident, lost for decades, and confronted with David's overwhelming power, could barely move in the water. David spared him, and the Brine King swore fealty. With the palace renovated and grander than before, David moved into the royal residence. He entrusted the day-to-day state affairs to Mara, naming her regent. "Your Majesty, there have been rumors circulating in the palace lately," Mara said a few days later as she entered the White Palace and hesitated before speaking. "What rumors?" David asked, chin propped casually, as if he were hearing entertaining gossip rather than allegations about himself. "It's said that you are not Atlantean, that you are a land dweller who obtained the trident by improper means." Mara watched him for a reaction. "What do you think, Mara?" David looked at her with apparent curiosity. "Those rumors are false." Mara bit her lip. "There are dissidents trying to spread rumors and undermine your Majesty's rule. I suggest arresting them all and throwing them into prison." David waved her off. "Let them talk. If they're lies, they'll collapse on their own." Mara stared, bewildered. She had expected fury, orders, arrests, a show of relentless power to stamp out any challenge. Instead, David looked almost indifferent. Had he no confidence in his ability to quell rebellion? Or was he waiting for unrest to give him a pretext to crush dissent in blood and terrorize the Atlantean people into obedience? She shivered at the thought and kept silent. David's calm demeanor was unnerving. "I might need to leave for a while. I'll leave internal affairs to you. David said slowly, as if remembering something. Now. Mera was stunned. He was an outsider, recently crowned, and his power and the people's loyalty were not yet secure. Why leave at this moment? Perhaps for a long time? She bowed her head, hiding the worry on her face. One odd action could be a coincidence, but a string of strange actions has reasons that outsiders cannot see, she thought. His smooth ascension to power concealed hidden dangers and many opponents. Mera convinced herself David was baiting the water, letting rebellion surface so he could justify a bloody purge that would ensure his rule remained unchallenged. She resolved not to let him succeed. After he left, she would run the kingdom tightly and prevent any trouble. Lock up anyone who stirs unrest, she decided inwardly. Her reasoning was understandable, but it missed the mark. David had indeed reasons for his behavior, but they weren't what Mera imagined. He looked out the palace window. He knew about the rumors questioning his legitimacy. They directly question the throne I now sit upon, he thought. The rumors were in fact true, but they needn't have gained traction. It had been his own manner that created suspicion. First, he had insisted on a force field around himself before and after taking the throne, avoiding contact with seawater like a germaphobe in a filthy cowshed. Acting as if he did not want a single drop of seawater on him had stirred wide mistrust. Second, he had not produced a royal family record to prove the continuity of the bloodline and thus the legitimacy of his claim. Finally, he had not controlled the narrative. He had been outwardly lenient, but not internally strict in handling speech about his origins. If he had done those few things, while still displaying the power that instilled fear, no lasting doubts would have arisen. But David had deliberately chosen not to. That would have interfered with his deeper goal of conquering Atlantis. "Is something wrong, my regent?" he asked, turning to Mera, who quickly recovered and forced a smile. "Of course not, my king," she replied, keeping her voice steady though the fear lingered. A faint smile tugged at David's mouth. In the cold, boundless void of the universe, stars like scattered diamonds speckled the black. Inside a colossal starship making blistering space jumps, a purple-skinned, stern-faced alien in a battle suit of Green Lantern energy spoke anxiously into the ship's communicator. "Sinestro, I'm at maximum speed. Tell Vantala I'll arrive as soon as I can." The face on the screen was Abin Sur, a legendary Green Lantern famous for courage and will. He'd been sent on missions the Guardians deemed too dangerous, and he'd always answered the call. Yet now, something weighed on him. "Vantala is dead," Sinestro said, his voice feeling like a stone. "What about the planet's inhabitants?" Abin Sur asked. "Like Talok, every living thing is gone. Their life energy has been drained. It's deathly quiet, yellow residue everywhere." Sinestro frowned. "That creature is different from the one you fought before. It's stronger. I asked the Guardians about its origin, but—" The image flickered and broke. Abin Sur's Green Lantern ring pulsed, warning of imminent danger. The universe outside the ship seemed to vanish into silence. "Abin Sur!" A piercing summons resonated through him, and an intense yellow light flared as if a sun had collided with the ship. The hull tore apart. Abin Sur was hurled like paper, slammed through a bulkhead, and fell into the lower decks. A monstrous, hideous thing, a yellow, ghost-like entity, swung a mass of long tentacles and shrieked with a sound that stirred the deepest fears. Abin Sur powered his ring and fired, but his constructs were weak against the thing now called parallax. His energy bolts were like candle flames against a storm and fizzled. He forced more power into his ring and fashioned a crude energy cannon. Dozens of shots finally severed a small tentacle. Parallax bellowed. "Abin Sur," it snarled, fury in every vibration. "You sealed me on that desolate world before. Now I will drain your life. You will die in pain and fear." From the severed tentacle, a lantern ring fell, carved like green jade. Abin Sur drew it back to him with the ring's power. Sorrow flashed through his eyes as he looked at Parallax and fired again. "Perhaps I'm no longer your match," he said, voice gritted, "but the core can deal with you." Parallax roared, its tentacles lashing beam after beam. The ship's shields shattered, and an energy strike slammed into Abin Sur's chest. Blood leaked through his uniform as he staggered for the escape pod, slammed the launch, and was ejected miles away. Inform the Guardians. The universe faces a crisis. The core must be assembled. Wounded and dying, Sur watched the hideous form of Parallax grow behind him. His vision dimmed. With his chest pierced and his breath failing, he issued a final command to the 2 lantern rings he still held. Proceed to the nearest life planet, activate the succession program, and select each ring's successor. Chapter 126. Welcome to the Green Lantern Corps, home. Dawn paled the sky as David slowed his descent over the little town. He could see the lights of his house, and through the windows, his parents moving about the kitchen preparing breakfast. A faint smile touched his lips. Neither Paradise Island's palaces nor Atlantis beneath the waves had ever given him this quiet, ordinary comfort. With the power he now held, he could have built a Tower of Babel on Earth, but no amount of stone could replace the warmth of family. He was about to land when a voice spoke in his ear. Intelligent life form locked. David Kent from Earth, you possess a powerful will to overcome fear. Welcome to the Green Lantern Corps. A streak of green, like a meteor, flew up from behind and hovered in front of him. The green glowing ring bore the familiar lantern's sigil. It swept in a practiced arc and slid onto his finger. There was none of the dramatic exhilaration he'd expected, no sudden rush of triumph, only a curious, careful study of the ring on his hand. Did a lantern die near Earth? He wondered, looking up. Another green streak raced toward Metropolis. His brow tightened. When a Corps member died, their ring would seek the nearest strong-willed successor. 2 unclaimed rings meant 2 Corps members had fallen close to Earth. Something odd was happening. He glanced toward Metropolis, thinking of the city's famous protector. Had a lantern ever chosen someone in Metropolis? Hal Jordan's coast city was the usual reference, but the city waking beneath the morning sun made another name come to mind. Clark. In Metropolis, a tower crane on a 6-story job site had snapped. Its boom hung like an inverted L, a construction worker clinging to a railing as the crane swayed. Television cameras rolled. Live from downtown Metropolis, an unexplained crane collapse. A worker's trapped, folks. People here are calling one name. The anchor's voice tightened. Superman! Lois Lane and Jimmy Olsen, on the scene, exchanged professional excitement. Rescue cushions had been placed below. The worker would be saved. Jimmy snapped photos, already planning to compare before and after shots to run with the story. A blue and red streak arced between buildings, and the worker's fall slowed to a stop. Under the gold of the rising sun, Superman gripped the broken boom and brought it close enough for the operator to climb down to the roof. The worker, breathless and awed, turned instantly from terrified victim into gushing fan. "Sorry to make a fuss," he said, sheepish. "My first time seeing you up close." Clark gave an embarrassed smile. He didn't like the hero worship, but he'd long accepted that his example inspired people. If my actions get even one more good person in this city to step up, it's worth it. A shout cut through the morning air. "You finally showed up, Superman." A middle-aged man had appeared at the roof access, his eyes and mouth glowing with a sickly green light. Radiant energy crackled from his hands. He swung the force against Superman, and Clark staggered as if hit by a truck. The crowd gasped. "Metahuman attack!" someone cried. "Who is he?" Clark steadied himself. The radiance pricked his skin like needles. He'd seen strange powers before, aliens and mutated humans, but this was different. The light felt poisonous to him. He tasted blood. The attacker ranted between blows. "You know who you are. You ruined my life. You took my wife, ran away with her." Clark blocked and recovered enough to push back. The man's face smelled of alcohol. He fought with the blind fury of a drunk. Clark's memory keyed in a month-old face, a down-and-out painter who disappeared into drink, Clay Ramsey. Back then, he'd been pathetic, ordinary. Now he radiated something else, something that clearly replicated the effects of Kryptonian energy. "You don't get to pretend you're the victim," Clark said, brow hard. "You beat her. She was terrified of you. I moved her to a shelter so she could be safe." Ramsey lunged again, fury and self-pity driving his strikes. Clark fought him with restraint, then sent a solid punch that slammed Ramsey into a billboard on a neighboring building. A green ring shot down in a blur and skidded toward the roof. Clark, weak and wary, swiped at it reflexively with a broken plank. The ring spun free and vanished upward. A green beam the thickness of a barrel slammed into Clark before he could recover. He went flying through signage and masonry, blood at the corner of his mouth. Ramsey staggered to his feet among the wreckage and laughed, triumphant. He gathered another blast of green energy to finish Superman off. You like being a hero? See how you handle this. A shadow fell over him. Something cold and remote watched from the air above. Ramsey looked up and felt the panic of a small creature under a great predator's eye. He fired again. The beam struck what looked like harmless air. David hovered, expression flat. He raised a hand. Under his will, under a power that felt unlike any normal strength, Ramsey's body jerked as if grabbed by invisible hands. He could no longer move his limbs. They straightened and locked. Help! Help! I'm being ripped apart! Ramsey screamed as forces inside his body contorted him. David's voice was even, cold with contempt. Scum like you haven't cared about anyone. Before you die, I'll let you feel the sky properly. Ramsey shot up like a cannonball, torn away from the rooftop and hurled into the emptiness above, accelerating through atmosphere. The air ground the breath from him. High above, low pressure and searing heat made his skin boil. He froze into a ghastly ice and flesh sculpture as the cold and vacuum did their work. In seconds, he was motionless, a corpse drifting in the pale blue. On the roof, Clark clutched his ribs and pushed himself up, pain flaring. Peaceful heaven, now he breathed, an old habit of calling out to a Randolph who wasn't there, then correcting himself. His vision was still hazy. The radiance Ramsey had used had cut through him in a way that felt more like poisoning than ordinary injury. David landed lightly, the green of his ring painting him in faint light. He let the ring hover back to his hand. Clark, half dazed and bristling with questions, watched him. The ring spoke again as if greeting its next bearer. Intelligent life form locked. Clark Kent from Earth. You possess a powerful will to overcome fear. Welcome to the Green Lantern Corps. The ring slid onto Clark's finger automatically. For a moment he stared at it, incredulous, then flinched as a wash of green cleared the residual lethal radiation from his system. The pain eased, and strength returned to him like a warm tide. David didn't resist the quiet tug from his own ring. A green construct wrapped both of them, shield and carriage, and began to lift them, spiraling toward the horizon. Bystanders blinked, helplessly dazed by the speed and surreal sight. In quick, tight motion, the two men vanished into the light. At the edge of the sea, a damaged escape pod had crashed on the shore. Abin Sur lay inside, weak and dying, his breaths shallow carts. He had barely survived to see the outcome of his ring's choices. Two figures had come down onto the beach, and the ring's report flashed cold and disbelieving information into his fading awareness. A living Kryptonian and another powerful, unknown cosmic life form. The spaceship crashed on Earth, a dying alien with purple skin. This must be Abin Sur. David waved his hand. A gravity field, like a giant invisible hand, lifted the escape pod steadily from the surf and settled it onto the beach. He glanced at the ring on his finger. I just don't know whether Clark or I got the Green Lantern ring that was meant for Hal Jordan. Hey, are you okay? Clark shoved open the pod's transparent hatch and found a purple-skinned alien slumped inside. Blood darkened the alien's chest. Clark pressed with both hands, trying to staunch the bleeding. Don't die. I'll get you to a hospital right now. The alien coughed, a ragged, painful sound. No. He shook his head weakly, forcing the words out. Cough, cough. I am Abin Sur, guardian of Sector 2814 of the Green Lantern Corps in this universe. The power of fear was eating him alive. It clung to the wounds like maggots in bone. Abin Sur's breathing came in shallow, labored pulls. Clark wanted to lift him and sprint to the nearest emergency room, but David put a hand on his shoulder and stopped him. Let him speak, Clark, David said quietly. Earth hospitals can't save him. David wasn't being melodramatic. If the ring's successor selection program had already activated, that meant there was nothing the medics could do. What the ring could do, it would have already done. Even the Dionysus factor might be useless against whatever was consuming Abin Sur. He watched the fear power eat through the alien's flesh and knew time was short. Abin Sur forced himself to nod. By core regulations, I must choose a successor before I die. This time is different. There are two rings. One is mine. The other belonged to my comrade Fantara of Sector 2811. He looked from Clark to David and back again. David understood that the ring on Clark's finger must be one of the rings Abin Sur meant. It fit with the old stories. Rings had sought out the Son of Tomorrow in comic lore before. Even dying, Abinsur's ring had reached for someone strong-willed first. He'd chosen elsewhere then because of that candidate's Kryptonian heritage, which had complicated matters and led to Hal Jordan's selection. Abinsur tried to explain, though each word cost him. What makes this special is not only that I must choose two successors at once, but the identities of those chosen. One, a Kryptonian, the other, a powerful, unknown race. Kryptonian? Clark's eyes widened. He pointed at himself, stunned. After nearly 20 years of wondering about his origins, could this be the answer at last? But the other description, an unknown powerful race, made his brow furrow. I'm human. David shook his head slowly. Abinsur must have misread. David's physiology, an eternal variant of some kind, could have looked alien to the dying lantern. He's seeing things because of my body, David said. All my other templates are essentially human, only the Thanos template looks different. Abinsur didn't have the strength to argue the finer points. He peered at them both and exhaled. The rings, they have chosen you. Take them, touch the lantern in the pod, point the ring at the lantern to charge it, then recite the oath. You will become members of the Green Lantern Corps. Great honor and heavy responsibility. He managed a thin smile. The universe needs you. My last duty is to pass them on. I hope the universe can survive this crisis. Krypton and the Green Lantern Corps had a long, bitter history, near outright hostility. The Corps had an unwritten rule, upheld more by habit than by law. Do not make Kryptonians Green Lanterns. Abinsur, still coherent for the moment, broke that rule. In times like these, he rasped, rules can be broken. With those last words, Abinsur closed his eyes. The great Green Lantern who had guarded his sector died with a whisper. Clark stood frozen by the pod and the body, feeling an instinctive recoil at the idea of being part of any corps. The idea of abandoning his family, of leaving Earth to police some cosmic peace, made him uneasy. Still, Abinsur's last words hung in the air. A crisis for the whole universe? He asked David quietly. David gave him a brisk summary. The Green Lantern Corps is led by the Guardians of the Universe. They claim to maintain cosmic order and use the power of will as their weapon. He hesitated over the crisis label. In the Corps' terms, it likely meant parallax. The oath is. And then, with Clark's hesitation mirrored by his own reluctance, the ring spoke. The familiar words cascaded out of the ring in a clear, otherworldly cadence. In brightest day, in blackest night, no evil shall escape my sight. Let those who worship evil's might beware my power, Green Lantern's light. The ring transmitted the oath. In the attic back home, the two of them had been reading comic book lore and half joking about such things. Now, in the damp light of the beach, David and Clark touched their rings, mimicked the oath, and both felt the surge. A brilliant green light flared. The rings unlocked and activated. A suit of willpower, an armor woven from green energy, clung to Clark's body. He scowled. This feels wrong. He hated green. He didn't want to be a cosmic policeman. But if there really was a danger to the universe that might spill down to Earth, he couldn't ignore it. He wanted to know why he'd been sent to Earth as a baby and who his people were. The ring answered part of that thirst for knowledge immediately. Data flooded into Clark's mind. Records, histories, coordinates. He pulled up images and files as soon as he could. David watched him, arms folded, a faintly incredulous look on his face. The scenario, two rings choosing two brothers, one supposedly a Kryptonian, had almost certainly never occurred in the long history of the Corps. Clark's face changed as he read. He turned to David, voice tight. I'm descended from a colonial empire? Cold-blooded colonizers? David flicked a wrist and projected a datasheet from the ring into the air between them. The entry on Krypton was short and bitter. Krypton, Sector 2183, Andromeda Galaxy, a living world, now destroyed. At their zenith, Kryptonians were cosmic colonizers who enslaved many life-bearing planets. Their society became corrupt and rigid. Your station determined at birth. The ruling classes crushed individuality. Kryptonians were described by many as naturally cold-blooded and terrifyingly powerful. David raised an eyebrow. He had expected that the data, written by the little blue guardians, would carry their bias. Anyone learning they descended from a race described as colonizers would feel a sting. Clark swallowed, looking small for a moment. Is this true? Clark asked, looking for reassurance. David met his brother's eyes. Half true. He told Clark what he knew. Krypton had indeed been a mighty, expansionist civilization, colonizers in the old days. They had threatened the universe's balance. The Guardians and the Green Lantern Corps had fought them. But while many descriptions condemned Krypton entirely, the Guardians' records were not neutral. They were written from the perspective of those who'd fought Krypton and lost too much. At their strongest, David said, 10,000 Kryptonians could have been enough to, well, destroy civilizations. The Green Lanterns, hardened as they were by centuries of combat, couldn't reliably beat a Kryptonian basking in a yellow sun. The Guardians call that their darkest era. Afterward, rather than defeating the threat, the Corps struck a deal with Krypton, a sort of uneasy peace to maintain cosmic order. David's voice carried a hint of contempt. It sounds honorable when you hear the Guardians speak, but they're biased. They'll frame any history to make themselves look right. Clark listened, confused and hurt, then thoughtful. The idea that his people, if they were his people, had harmed other worlds made his chest ache. That ache softened when David put a hand on his shoulder. Clark, David said gently, you're you. You don't have to let an old civilization's sins define you. You decide who you are by what you do. It was the comfort a younger brother could give. Clark let out a breath he hadn't known he'd been holding. Learning Krypton was gone stung, but it fit the strange, distant questions he'd always had. He'd suspected something cataclysmic had forced a child into a spaceship. Looking up toward where the Andromeda Galaxy sat in the night, he imagined a bright home now extinguished. It made him feel small and lonely, but then he looked at his real family around the kitchen table and felt steadier. Protecting them and this planet mattered right now. So let me get this straight, their father said finally, after a long silence. Jonathan Kent had just taken a sip of hot tea and almost spat it out. You two were picked by rings from outer space. A dying alien, Abin Sur, chose you. And now you're supposed to join some corps that patrols the universe? That's it in a nutshell, David said. We didn't mean to worry you. You saw the lights on TV, so we had to explain. Martha's face was taut with concern. David hurried to ease her. We don't plan to join the Corps right away, he said. We want to understand what's happening first. Clark nodded. Abin Sur made it sound like a cataclysm, a universal crisis. David forced a small smile. He didn't correct the whole of Abin Sur's implication. Parallax did pose a real threat, but calling it a universe-wide apocalypse was melodramatic. The Corps had suffered catastrophes, many linked to the emotional spectrum and things like parallax, the embodiment of fear. There's trouble, David admitted, but it isn't as simple as the universe is ending. That said, there's a real risk. If parallax is involved, Earth could be a target. Jonathan looked alarmed. Earth could be in danger? It might, David said. He explained what he knew of the plot. Parallax had hunted Abin Sur before. Abin Sur had once sealed or fought the entity. Now Parallax, driven by hatred and the hunger for fear, would follow the trail to Earth. It wanted to finish Abin Sur. Perhaps his death would feed it. We might need to leave for a while, Clark said, to sort out the core thing, to go to Oa and see what's going on. For the universe, David said, but under his breath, and for Earth. The family discussion was still unfolding when David felt a shift in his gravity field. He looked up, alerted. Far off over the fields, something moved with impossible speed, a figure streaking toward the farm. Its anatomy was unlike a human's, fins along its head, skin wet and smooth as if born of water. It wore a sleek green suit, and the hand it extended bore a Green Lantern ring. David's mouth went dry. Maybe we don't need to decide anything right now, he said. He stood, eyes narrowing. Someone's here. On Oa, in the cold, majestic, open-air sanctuary, the Guardians of the Universe stood like living statues atop their towering stone pillars. Blue-skinned and ancient, they were the founders of the Green Lantern Corps, reserved, inscrutable, and beyond ordinary emotion. They looked down as the news reached them. A massive beam of light has vanished in the universe, a voice reported. Sinestro, standing among the Guardians, felt grief for his fallen mentor, Abin Sur, and anger at the same time. 2 planets' inhabitants were annihilated by an unknown enemy that wields yellow fear. We still don't know who it is. Abin Sur said one thing before he died. Another answered quietly. It's Parallax. Sinestro glared at the Guardians, longing for more than a terse order to sweep the Corps into battle. We already know that. We must assess the disaster to see if a larger deployment is needed, he demanded. The Corps did not serve to be sent blind into meaningless death. Its warriors protected the universe by understanding what they fought for. The Guardians' voices, owned by Aeons, were flat and untroubled. Assess? Sinestro stepped forward, agitation cracking his composure. I can lead the Corps' warriors against this enemy. I'll prove our golden age is not over. But what are you hiding from us? You have knowledge as vast as the cosmos. Why was the mission message so brief? The Guardians were silent a long moment before one of them finally spoke. We debated whether to activate a power we swore never to use, the power of fear. The Green Lantern Corps had defended order for billions of years, but not every darkness had bowed to their green will. Sinestro had hints of old history, the Book of Oa's vague dark ages, and now understood the warning. The power of fear was dangerous, corrupting. One of us, trying to show fear could be mastered, entered it himself, the Guardian continued. He was consumed and became our enemy. That was the origin of Parallax. Before it grew by devouring fear, Parallax had been imprisoned on a dead world by a courageous lantern. Now, the entity had escaped and was growing stronger. Is the power of fear stronger than will? Sinestro asked after a beat. The power of will comes from within. Strong will yields great power, but it often has limits, another Guardian answered. Fear is different. It feeds on the fear of others. Infinite life, infinite fear, therein lies boundless power. Parallax may have absorbed the fear of entire civilizations, Sinestro said, face darkening. Can our warriors resist that? The Guardians exchanged looks before one declared, tone cold and inevitable, then we must fight fear with fear. Sinestro's fists clenched at the implication. Were the lives of the Corps' best to be used as instruments in some hidden plan? He forced a respectful smile and bowed his head. Then we must forge a yellow ring. A Guardian opened his palm. A yellow lantern ring, alive with the color of fear, floated toward Sinestro, who stared at it as if drawn. The powers of fear and will share a root, the Guardian said. This ring requires no formal training to wield. Our scouts report Parallax is moving toward a living planet called Earth. Your mission is to resolve this crisis. Use the Corps' renown. Be careful of the erosion of fear, another Guardian warned. Fear will try to corrupt. Sinestro gripped the ring but did not put it on inside the sanctuary. He turned and left quickly, emotion barely contained. The Guardians watched him go. After the long silence settled back over Oa, an impassive voice added, The Corps' fame will fuel him. He may still be unstoppable. Arrange for others to aid them. I have arranged guides, Kryptonians and powerful beings of an unknown race, someone else said, looking out at the nebula-strewn expanse. They will be guided. Toma Ray streaked through space, the tiny yellow ring on his communicator flashing direction. He descended toward a small town where 2 lantern ring picks were supposed to be waiting. But something violent and invisible seized him mid-flight. An invisible field pushed back with such force he could not approach. A green-lit, high-tech armor condensed around him reflexively as he readied to defend himself. The force filled the air above the town. From below, 2 green light figures rose. One was David, bristling at the stranger's intrusion. The other was Clark, hovering with that effortless, dreamlike flight that came naturally to him. David had shut the intruder out of the town with the faint, practiced power of a local guardian. He didn't want strangers barging in. Toma Ray of Sector 2813, the fish-like alien said, landing cautiously. You're adapting well to flight. Toma Ray's voice was rough with surprise. Most recruits were terrified when the ring first chose them. These 2 were calm, unusually so. Then he saw Clark properly, and the ring itself blinked warnings. He recoiled as if seeing a ghost. A Kryptonian? David's eyebrows shot up. I thought Krypton was destroyed. Toma Ray's assessment protocols had not warned him he would be mentoring a Kryptonian, much less one living under a yellow sun. They didn't tell me I had to train a Kryptonian, he muttered, glancing nervously at the bright daytime sun overhead. And your profile shows an unknown life form, potential comparable to a Kryptonian. David snorted. He had no desire to leave Earth to patrol the cosmos under the command of little blue men who issued orders without answers. We don't plan to join your corps, he said bluntly. Toma-Rai blinked. Joining the Corp is voluntary, but you should learn more. This is a great honor. David smoothed his chin thoughtfully. The little blue men did not casually change their long-held policies. Had they really decided to accept Kryptonians? Or was there something else going on, some larger war forcing desperate choices? When David mentioned Abin Sur, Toma-Rai went quiet, grief softening his face. His sector adjoined Abin Sur's. The loss had cut him deeply. You're right, Toma-Rai said at last. Parallax is moving through this sector, devouring lives through fear. If it gathers enough power, it will attack Oa. That might explain the haste. Normally, recruits were brought to Oa, shown the Corps' history, and trained thoroughly under a mentor. This mission had been rushed. Some of our members are already searching for Parallax, he added, attempting a smile. But for now, let me show you what your lantern ring can do. David all but rolled his eyes. Most Greens had never seen Parallax either. The Guardians had done a careful job of keeping that history obscured. Toma-Rai continued, unaware of the skepticism. A Green Lantern's power is the power of will, he said, guiding them to a deserted field. Green light unfurled, illustrating the Corps' history. Across 3,600 sectors, the Corps keeps peace under that light. A strong will, channeled through a ring, can do almost anything. Anything? Clark asked, incredulous. The sound of omnipotence hung in the air. The emotional spectrum is a universal force, shaped by living beings' emotions, Toma-Rai replied. Each emotion has a corresponding entity, a lantern beast. These entities bond with hosts or wielders to reach their full potential. Toma-Rai's voice lowered. Parallax is the embodiment of fear. Once, a guardian sought to master it and was consumed. Abin Sur managed to imprison it on a dead world, but Parallax has escaped and is growing again. It can feed on the fear of entire civilizations. David listened, calculating. As an entity of the spectrum, Parallax's strength would be crucial to the fate of the cosmos. If he could provoke Parallax, if Parallax were to fixate on him, he might gain leverage, possibly drawing out the fear entity's attention and creating opportunity. A cold, opportunistic thought flashed across his face. Parallax's current host was said to be one of the original Guardians. Its present body might not be using its full potential. This might be a rare opportunity, David thought aloud. But Parallax hadn't yet reached Earth. The crisis might be grave, but for now, Toma-Rai didn't seem panicked. The Corps had protected the universe for millennia. It would not be overturned lightly. Clark, eager but cautious, said nothing further. Toma-Rai continued to demonstrate the Lantern Ring's capabilities. A Green Lantern who masters will can push the limits of the ring, shattering planets or creating suns. Such things are within theoretical reach for those who can command their will. David looked down at the green ring on his hand, curiosity and calculation warring in his eyes. How much of that power could he or Clark tap into? If the emotional spectrum was subjective, then the upper limit would depend on their minds. He let the thought settle. I wonder how much of the power of will I can unleash with this lantern ring, he mused silently. Chapter 129, Taste the Wrath of the Planet, 4K2. The lantern ring can turn mental fantasies into reality, construct anything, and simulate material properties. From black holes and stars to handsaws and screws, its power and hardness depend entirely on your will. Toma-Rai waved his hand. His will coalesced into a glass bottle suspended in midair. He flicked his finger. It rang with a crisp, fragile sound just like real glass. Now you two try. He smiled encouragingly. Clark, astonished, extended his ring, held his breath, and concentrated. Green light took shape at his command, and a slightly crooked glass bottle appeared. Compared to Toma-Rai's, it looked like a defective model. Imagine more detail. It's normal not to be proficient at first, Toma-Rai advised. David raised his hand. Green light condensed around his will, and a Klein bottle, its long, slender neck folding back into itself, materialized perfectly. He glanced at the lantern ring on his hand with a small, bemused lift of an eyebrow. It's an incredible feeling, like operating a universal printer that obeys your thoughts. Toma-Rai turned from the unusual bottle to David, surprised. I've never seen a newcomer master willpower so quickly. If David hadn't been carrying his own data, Toma-Rai would have assumed a seasoned Green Lantern stood before him. David's expression stayed calm. He had precise control over energy, and his specialty with gravity demanded the same kind of meticulous focus. Now let's test how strong your wills are. He collided his glass bottle with Clark's. The simplest verification, the stronger will would remain. Clark's bottle shattered with a clang, and Tomarai's bottle soon developed cracks and then exploded into motes of green light. He was taken aback. Setting aside Clark's clumsy detailing, if both bottles burst, didn't that mean this newcomer's will was stronger than his, a battle-hardened Green Lantern? He watched the two of them more closely now. Everyone has a will, but in peaceful circumstances it rarely shows its strength, Tomarai said. This young man might have grown up sheltered and untested, but when pushed, he could unleash a will powerful enough to surprise even veterans. Very good. Now it's your turn. Tomarai condensed another bottle and slammed it against David's Klein bottle. Cracks spidered across Tomarai's creation, and with a crash, it shattered, while David's bottle remained flawless, suspended, and intact. Tomarai's eyes widened. Are all newcomers monsters now? He kept switching his gaze between them. One after another, new arrivals who might already be stronger than him. Which of them was stronger he couldn't tell yet. David casually dispersed the bottle. He had slain the son of Zeus, routed the host of the demon king of hell, conquered Paradise Island formed by gods, and subdued the Atlantean rulers of the seven seas. A little surprise from an alien was no great excitement to him. Just as Tomarai was about to give them tips on using the lantern ring, his own ring flashed with a message from OA headquarters. After reading it, his face went pale, disbelief written all over him. Parallax has reached the life-bearing planet called Earth in Sector 2814. Tomarai, assigned to Sector 2813, you are to lead the two core newcomers, along with any available core forces, to stop and eliminate Parallax and protect Earth's civilization from annihilation. To throw two rookies who are just starting to learn the Lantern Ring into immediate combat and against one of the Corp's most powerful enemies. That's like teaching someone to pull a trigger and then sending them straight into a meat grinder. Tomarai strode aside and urgently queried headquarters through his ring. The reply was an unquestionable order from the Corps' founders. A powerful enemy that threatens the universe demands full mobilization. If Parallax grows unchecked, nothing in the universe will be spared. The Green Lantern Corps must marshal all available forces to eliminate the darkness. I have some very bad news for you, Tomarai said, swallowing. With the universe's safety on the line, he could offer little else. He turned to the two newcomers. Parallax is headed for the planet under our feet. I know this is unfair, but the Corps needs you to work together to stop it. When we confront that monster, you two stay behind me. Clark's face went white. Parallax is coming to Earth? David was more composed. He had expected Parallax's arrival. Then his expression sharpened. Wait, he's already here. David's gaze fixed in one direction. Clark shut his eyes and listened. From 1,000 miles away, the sounds of chaos reached him. Screams, cries, the city in an uproar. David felt the disturbance through his gravity field and saw the colossal shape hanging over the city below. Parallax. Where are the Green Lanterns? Clark demanded. The monster had already reached Earth, and Clark had little experience dealing with a threat of this scale. They might still be en route, Tomarai admitted, face tight with embarrassment. For now, it might just be up to us. The three of them shot into the sky and raced toward Coast City. Clark, desperate to help, pushed himself faster and faster, exceeding the flight the unfamiliar lantern ring was giving him, blasting past hundreds of times the speed of sound in an instant. David kept pace with ease. Tomarai, an experienced lantern, could not. He strained at his ring but couldn't match their speed. Go on ahead, he said, and watched the two streak away, his eyes wide. Above Coast City, Parallax hung like a monstrous, hideous sky beast. 1,000 tentacles writhed. One clutched a corpse freshly torn from the ground. The face was all too familiar, Abin Sur's fallen body. Abin Sur, you finally died. Pity I couldn't savor your final moments, the creature hissed. The dead no longer fear, so their life force could not be easily absorbed. Parallax smashed the corpse, bones crunching into gore as it fell away. Its hungry, avaricious gaze swept down to the city. You cannot stop me now. Watch as I drain these terrified insects dry. On the streets, cars lay strewn. people stumbled from them, staring up in horror. The sky was blotched by a looming, dark yellow entity that exuded the very essence of fear. A single glance invaded the mind with terror, and those affected were overcome, their thoughts and bodies seized by panic. Fleeing did little good against the monster's extending tentacles. Parallax inhaled deeply, intoxicated by panic. Its eyes flared. It opened a gaping black maw and began to feed on people's life energy, extracted through their fear. One by one, terrified faces drained of vitality, turning to skeletal husks and collapsing. "Help! Someone save us!" people screamed. A fierce roar split the air. Two figures streaked in from the horizon, trailing wakes of displaced air. David loosed thick purple impact waves. Clark, encased in a green battlesuit fashioned from the lantern ring and bearing the Corps' emblem, unleashed heat vision. Their beams, one purple, one red, cut across the sky with searing heat that vaporized steel where they struck Parallax's body. The monster roared, thrown back. "Superman!" someone cried. "And Purple Light Man!" another yelled. The terrified crowd looked up, eyes bright as if seeing saviors. Clark had fought mostly in Metropolis. David had only briefly shown himself twice in public, but both were well known worldwide. The sight of them inspired hope. Parallax snarled. In the sea of fear that fed it, it felt no tremor of fear from the two attackers. It retaliated with a barrage of light cannons made of pure fear force that swept the sky like a tidal wave. Parallax had already fed on two civilizations' life energies and was now monstrously powerful. Clark and David raised their arms to block. Clark was slammed backward, tumbling through the air before regaining control. His green suit was scorched and one arm glowed red hot, but he was not seriously injured. David, anchored by his gravity field, held his position like a spike in the wind. Parallax's impact could not budge him. When the torrent passed, he was unharmed. He thrust a palm forward, and a yellow fear force beam lanced into the sky. "Taste this!" Since the Black King template had merged with him, absorbing and redirecting power was effortless for David. "You dare use my own weapon against me?" he growled. Parallax lashed out, tearing skyscrapers from the ground like weeds and hurling them at David. He manipulated the gravity field with a gesture, suspending the buildings in midair as if they were toys. Many still contained people. David shoved those towers far behind him and kept pursuing the creature. Clark, seeing David grapple with the monster, flew forward and landed a crushing punch on Parallax's grotesque head. A white shockwave rolled outward for miles, and Parallax shot backward into the sky. "There are too many people down there. Let's change the battlefield," David said, and he set his jaw. He hurled a stream of fear force to shove Parallax into open space, accelerating it away from the city. Controlling the absorbed power was second nature to him, but the fear force was nauseating. When he used it, he could faintly hear a chorus of terrified screams, a noise that grated at him. Fear force eroded the mind. His mental defenses filtered it into nothing more than an annoyance, but the effect on others would be worse. Toma Ray arrived with grim fury, seeing corpses on the ground. He flung a massive green net from his ring to ensnare Parallax and, straining like a tow cable, began dragging it toward space. Even so, Parallax was so enormous that the net felt like a fragile web. It lashed back, spitting torrents of fear force. "Get out of the way," Parallax bellowed. Clark threw himself between Toma Ray and the blast, raising an arm to shield the lantern. The fear force slammed into them both. Toma Ray was hurled away, nearly cleaving through a building. Blood trickled from his mouth. His organs rocked as if he'd walked the edge of death. He had always prided himself guarding tens of thousands of star systems. He had never realized how vulnerable he truly was. The aftershock of Parallax's casual strike had nearly finished him. A cold dread spread through him. If he, a respectable Green Lantern, was so nearly killed, what hope did the Corps have against such a monster? Could the Corps' combined strength really deal with this thing? David's expression went cold. "You want to destroy this planet? Then taste the wrath of the planet, Parallax." The planet's life that Parallax intended to devour included people David cared about, Jonathan and Martha among them. He unleashed himself completely. Each punch released torrents of cosmic energy, amplified by his control of the planet's gravity field beneath his feet. Every strike shoved Parallax back tens of kilometers. The monster spun and fought back, dizzy and enraged. but its blows merely glanced off David like stones dropping into the sea. Tomare, still reeling from how easily Parallax had hurt him, watched David's onslaught with his mouth hanging open. Shock and a wordless awe filled him as he witnessed the newcomer violently blasting Parallax away, time and again. Chapter 130, A Passage to Death. On television, two figures fought a giant monster in the sky, driving it higher and higher toward outer space. What is that thing? A space monster has appeared over Coast City, and over 1,000 people are dead? Oh my God, are aliens attacking Earth? Go, Purple Light Man, Superman. Is the fate of Earth now resting on two heroes? What is the space agency doing? They spend all that money on space and didn't give an early warning. What is the military doing? Just watching. The internet exploded. Everyone who saw the monster felt fear swell in their chests, praying for Superman and Purple Light Man, praying for the planet. In Gotham, at the old Wayne family mansion, Bruce Wayne watched the ultra-clear feed from his private satellite with a grave expression, clicking his pen again and again. The veins on the back of his hand stood out. "Master Bruce, you know your Batjet won't help you in a space fight," Alfred said quietly, watching the battle alongside him. "I know, Alfred." Bruce's voice was hoarse. "You don't need to remind me that there's nothing I can do but watch." This was no ordinary bank robber. It wasn't the kind of threat he usually hunted. "The Bat needs upgrades. I need contingency plans, so I'm not just a spectator next time." Alfred's face tightened. He had watched this boy grow into a man driven past endurance, returning to the Batcave battered, bleeding, and trying to patch himself back together. Gotham alone had taken too much. "You don't have to shoulder the entire world, Master Bruce," Alfred said. "But when the storm comes, you'd best be prepared. It doesn't care whether you stand on the shore or wade into the sea." On the Kent farm, Jonathan Kent and Martha sat on the living room sofa, holding each other, frozen in front of the TV. Jonathan clutched his fist, as if trying to give strength to the two men fighting above. "Go, son," he said, breathlessly, eyes fixed on the screen. A kettle whistled, forgotten in the kitchen. Bang! Clark accelerated, a missile of muscle streaking across the sky, chasing the monster with David at his side. They pushed Parallax outward. Clark's punches met the creature's hide like rubber. Blows that should have hurt didn't seem to do permanent damage. "Use your eyes, Clark." David's low growl carried over the roar of battle as he hurled a torrent of energy. It's almost an energy being, immune to much of physical attack. Up in near space, unfiltered by the atmosphere, Clark would bathe in sunlight and gain near-limitless power. Clark dodged Parallax's sweeping tentacles and fired heat vision, slicing at the creature. Green light flashed as Tomarai manifested a small craft and piloted it through the melee, firing to harass and distract. "Who are you, unknown life form?" Parallax rumbled. "I sense a possibility in you. You are more suitable than anyone to carry my power." Parallax, the lantern beast of fear, tasted something, greed lighting its many eyes. It lashed tentacles at David, trying to enfold him. "This body I inhabit is powerful, but not enough to unleash fear fully," it whispered through the void. "But within you, young life form, fear flows like water. Come into my embrace, and we will spread fear across the universe." A gravity field smashed into David, and he surged with resistance. Parallax's tentacles sank into resistance like a quagmire. "I have no interest in that," David said. He punched Parallax hard in the face. Scorching cosmic energy erupted. For a second, it was like a small purple sun blossomed in the vacuum, and Parallax slammed away, driven by a blow capable of leveling a city. Parallax had once occupied a guardian of the universe, beings ancient enough to shun certain emotions, convinced feelings hindered development. Because of that detachment, they were ill-suited to a power born of fear. Parallax believed itself perfect for fear because it could manipulate energy, any energy bent to its will. David's face was cold. He would not yield his body. Toma Ray walked a razor's edge, every nerve taut. If David and Clark didn't keep Parallax occupied, he had no doubt the monster could annihilate him in a single opening. With a flash, like a ball being batted back and forth, Parallax reached the exosphere. Air thinned. The sun's rays waited. Realizing it would be expelled if it remained bulky, Parallax began to shrink. Its massive form, once able to cast fear like a shadow over a city, slimmed down. "Its size has shrunk, but it's gotten stronger." Clark grunted as a single tentacle sent him tumbling. It was approaching the creature's original shape, a sleeker, more dangerous form that moved with terrifying speed. David's attacks became a hailstorm of energy, but in near vacuum, and with Parallax's newfound compact power, not every strike connected. "Don't come any closer," he warned Toma Rai. "This isn't a fight you should meddle in." "Why haven't my corps shown up?" David wondered. Why had the Green Lanterns not arrived? Two rookies who hadn't even formally joined the Corps were holding the front line against a universe-level threat. Parallax lashed out and caught Clark in its writhing tentacles, its skull-like face pressing close to the Kryptonians. It hoped to pry open a chink of fear. But Clark's will was stronger than expected. He shot heat vision while roaring and broke free. "You reek, Parallax." David punched again, yanking a tentacle and decking the creature. Parallax's head rocked, surprise flashing across its visage. "It's gotten stronger, hasn't it? Because I sense another, even more powerful weapon." David glanced at the distant sun and felt something shift. He manipulated gravity with a thought, sending explosive force outward, his connection to both Earth and the star behind them. "It's useless. I've devoured the life energy of 2 planets. My power is boundless," Parallax boasted, and several tentacles snapped under the strain as the fight pushed into deep space. Its limbs regenerated in an instant, and it lunged again. "One of you will die." The 3 of them fought on. Clark adapted quickly to space combat, fueled by sunlight and the thrill of the fight. Parallax fed on fear. The more it sowed, the more energy it could harvest. But Clark's solar strength, David's gravitational and energy manipulation, and Tomarai's craft combined into a brutal, seemingly endless engagement. Minutes stretched into dozens of minutes. Parallax's outer form healed as it took damage. Clark's wounds closed in a heartbeat under the sun. David, shielded by gravity and raw physicality, remained uninjured. Still, Parallax would not fall. "This thing has too much fear power," David said quietly. "At this rate, it will take days." He punched a rip through the creature, an attack that should have torn it apart, but the wound closed faster than he could blink. A system alert pulsed through his mind. Anger from Parallax 580. An unprecedented amount of emotional energy for a single entity. If the Green Lantern Corps eventually overwhelmed Parallax, the monster would still have ingested enough fear to leave a mark. That wouldn't do. David had a plan. If he could push Parallax into the sun, the star's unimaginable heat could end it. Hal Jordan had attempted something similar once, drawing a bloated Parallax into the sun, but Hal couldn't manipulate gravity the way David could. "Let's do what we did before. Push him into the sun, Clark," David said to the tired Kryptonian. Clark's eyes burned. "Right. Why didn't I think of that?" Energy roared through him again. The sun's core would finish what they had started. Parallax sneered and lashed, sending Clark tumbling. "You think you can destroy me in the sun? I'm returning to my precious planet. Let's see if you can stop me." David smelled the hint of fear now, Parallax's own dread at the prospect of being displaced. It gave the beast pause. "That planet holds people and things you care about. First, I will make you see whether you feel fear at losing them." Parallax roared and fired cannons of energy, attempting to force them apart with words and blasts. "Once fear begins, it cannot be stopped. I will control it." "Monster, you won't win," Clark growled, remembering the bodies left as skeletal husks drained of life by fear. He slammed a fist toward Parallax. David's voice was colder than the void. "Template fusion 40% complete." He reached out with his mind and palm, seeking the sun's gravitational field, threading it to Earth's behind him. During the battle, his abilities had unlocked another edge. His control over gravity, Graviton's gift, let him link planetary and stellar fields, creating a narrow line between 2 massive wells of attraction. With that channel in place, something extraordinary happened. The approaching planet's own motion produced a repulsive force against Parallax, while the star's gravity tugged with unimaginable pull. "What did you do?" Parallax snarled, straining to hold position, too weak even to flex a tentacle. David flew in front of it, expressionless, and drove a fist into its head. A rippling wave of energy blasted through the void. "I opened a passage for you," he declared. "A passage to death!" Chapter 131, Take Back Their Lantern Rings, 4K5. Under David's fist, Parallax fell like someone toppled off a cliff, plummeting into the abyss. The fear entity howled as an irresistible gravitational pull dragged it toward the blazing sun. "You can't kill me," Parallax roared, fighting every second, trying to stabilize itself. David gave it no mercy. He bent gravity to his will, riding the field like a tether. His body struck like a meteor. One punch sent Parallax tumbling, another followed. A relentless barrage drove the creature into the sun's surface. The star's thousands of degrees heat lit David's face as though from within. A final blow tore a fiery ripple across the solar surface, miles wide. "No!" Parallax screamed as the sun's gravity seized it, dragging it inward where thermonuclear fire never ceased. Its energy shell ruptured. The guardian body it had occupied was consumed. Molten and incandescent, Parallax was incinerated down to nothing. "I will return, I will, when I return, what you cherish." The voice faded into nothing, as even a speck of ash vanished under the star's heat. David hovered in space, waiting. Under the field's perception, the last vestiges of the entity collapsed. He watched the death of the host body, then turned toward Earth. Clark was there, urgent and relieved. Tamara floated nearby, visibly shaken. He had seen only the last moments. Parallax struck away by David, then both disappearing like streaks of light. "He's dead," David said slowly. Tamara's nerves leapt at the statement. "Dead. For now," David corrected. "You don't have to worry about him hurting anyone, at least for a while." "For a while?" Tamara's face crumpled. "What do you mean? He's not truly dead." David looked at him with a tired patience. Old gods like Ares were hard to kill, yes, but they were still mortal compared to Parallax, the personification of fear. As long as any sentient being in the universe could feel fear, Parallax could not be truly extinguished. Hatred from Parallax plus 300. David glanced at the prompt only briefly. Parallax's consciousness would recede to the source of fear energy and rebuild, waiting for rebirth. Its familiar octopus with a bald skull form was an adaptation from a host. Its true nature was more insectile. Tamaray's expression turned to alarm. The realization that Parallax could not be permanently killed and that it had once possessed a guardian hit him like a cold wind. He thought of the broken pillar in the temple and opened his mouth to ask more. Green light flared from space. Figures in emerald suits assembled swiftly and silently, more than 100 green lanterns, each radiating the calm, hard authority of seasoned veterans. Leading them, in a contrasting yellow, stood Sinestro. His red skin, pointed ears, and thin mustache made him unmistakable. He looked like a blade newly drawn, eager for combat. "Tamare, where is Parallax?" Sinestro's voice cut through the void. Tamare frowned. He was driven into the sun by these two, by David. He nodded toward David with a mixture of awe and disbelief. Sinestro stared. The idea that two newcomers had dealt with Parallax, the entity that had killed Abin-Sur, was absurd to him. Before he could speak, an order pulsed through every lantern ring present. It came from the Guardians. Retrieve their lantern rings. The message left no room for debate. Kryptonians and any unknown race associated with them were not permitted in the Green Lantern Corps. Tamari's color drained. The Guardians are ordering confiscation? The 100 Green Lanterns turned their cold, clinical gazes on David and Clark. The Book of Oa forbade Kryptonian membership. Their history said Kryptonians once brought darkness across the cosmos. Sinestro's yellow ring flared as he smiled with the thrill of a hunt. "Hand over your rings!" At once, the Green Lantern's rings reached out. Clark's green light fluttered and died. His suit winked out, and he stumbled in the vacuum, disoriented. He fumbled for stability in zero-G, panic flushing his features. "Calm down, Clark." David sounded almost amused. "Kryptonians can fly. You can survive in space with your body." Clark, belatedly realizing his own abilities, found he truly could sustain himself, his biological force field working as it always had, only now he accepted it. He looked down at David's hand and saw David's ring still burning bright. "Why isn't your ring responding?" Sinestro and the others exchanged baffled looks. The rings were supposed to obey the Guardians, yet David's remained untouched. "It was a matter of rewriting a program," David said quietly. "You can overwrite the ring's commands." The idea stunned them. Willpower could create constructs, yes, but to alter the embedded governance of a ring, only the greatest lanterns had ever been rumored to do such things. David offered no grandstanding. The Guardians, keeper little blue men who surrendered emotions long ago, made a mess of emotion-based systems. It wasn't hard to cut them off. The statement ignited outraged murmurs. The Guardians' authority had been absolute for eons. The rings responded immediately to the order regardless, and Sinestro's yellow constructs leapt forward. Chains of green light lashed out, intent on binding both of them. Clark was wrapped and flung like a boulder, untamed strength so violent that a dozen lanterns were thrown off balance. David, who had the uncanny control of will itself, met the attack head-on. He sliced through the ring's chains with beams of cosmic energy from his eyes, each beam shearing through the constructs. "You're under arrest, kid." Sinestro's yellow light brightened as he manifested a massive alien wolf and hurled it at David. Other lanterns erected mechs, hammers, swords, ships, and energy rifles. The Corp's elite attacked in formation, but their weapons glanced off David as if he were already beyond them. He waved a hand and shifted the solar system's gravity field in a wide sweep. The younger lanterns were toppled like trees in a storm. Sinestro, however, was no ordinary enemy. He embraced fear as his power and wove it into forms that unnerved the mind. He summoned a simulation of parallax. Thick, writhing tentacles struck for David like the echo of the entity's old strength. David caught a tentacle mid-swing and crushed it, annoyed. "Using the thing I just killed against me? Weak." Sinestro smirked and escalated his conjurations. He wrapped himself in a fear construct that shaped him into an enormous, six-winged flaming eagle, the Angali's giant eagle, famed across sectors for its speed and ferocity. Sinestro's cunning adaptability was obvious. He had spread the universe's fear like a cloak and made himself a conduit for it. David responded in the simplest, most brutal way. He pulled. Not the piecewise gravity he had used to fling parallax, but a subtle, focused tug along one line, so slight to him that it seemed effortless. The sun itself took hold of Sinestro. A pulse from David's eyes struck Sinestro as he felt the stellar pull. The giant construct lost cohesion. Sinestro's world narrowed to white-hot pain as the sun rushed up behind him, burning closer with horrifying speed. "No, Lantern Ring, open a wormhole." Sinestro's voice cracked with sudden fear. He yanked a portal open behind him in a panic and vanished into it. David only nodded once. He knew the ring's transit engines were crude at that scale. Sinestro had escaped, but shaken. He would likely not return in the same guise anytime soon. With Sinestro gone, the rest of the Corps were exposed. David tightened his control on gravity and tossed them aside like leaves. Over 100 veteran lanterns were sent reeling, some injured, all shocked. They had faced monsters, tyrants, and pirates, but never anything that radiated will and presence like this young man. Chains of emerald light converged, forming colossal holographic visages in space, 3 ancient faces of the Guardians themselves, projected by the rings. Their tone was cold, millennia-old authority. "That's enough, young life forms," the Guardians intoned, stern and unblinking. David, breathing steady, floated amid the shattered constructs, the solar wind whispering around him. Clark steadied himself beside him, still dazed. Tomare's eyes darted between the Guardians and the two newcomers, torn between duty and gratitude. The universe had just been saved by 2 beings the Corps considered outcasts, and the old order had just called for their submission. The Guardians of the Universe, ancient billions-year-old beings, loomed as towering projections in space. Their faces were stern, indifferent, each expression radiating a stubborn, calcified authority. "Return the lantern rings," one intoned. "Their choosing you was a programming error. You should never have been chosen." Clark felt a flare of anger at the sight of the legendary beings who had founded the Green Lantern Corps and claimed to preserve cosmic order. He had just helped them deal with parallax, only to be met with a merciless demand. Still, he did not treasure the lantern rings that much. If anything, they were a tool. Even if they could help deal with kryptonite radiation, Clark thought they weren't worth giving up. "Why don't we just hand the rings back, David?" he asked. Flying beside him, David looked at the dozen projection Guardians and shook his head. That would be too easy for them. David cared even less about the lantern rings as a source of power. The Green Lantern Ring was praised as the universe's greatest weapon. Whoever it chose became a cosmic policeman. For David, however, the ring didn't increase his strength so much as simplify tasks, an occasionally helpful tool, but he would never surrender them. You expect us to use our power and then let you take the rings back and pretend nothing happened? Not a chance. His voice was cold. Where were you before we fought Parallax? Why didn't you come then to reclaim the rings? Now that Parallax is in the sun, suddenly it's a programming error. David spat at their hypocrisy. Toma Rai, who had watched silently until then, frowned as the pieces clicked into place. He glanced at the supposedly wise guardians with disbelief. This all seems too convenient, he muttered. Clark's expression darkened. Without us, Parallax wouldn't have been stopped here, he said. A guardian stepped forward, tone like cold iron. The lantern rings are the Green Lantern Corps' sole instrument for maintaining universal order. They cannot fall into outside hands. He invoked the safety of every being in the universe as justification. He raised a hand, and green light condensed into images. Oa's headquarters, 3,000 Green Lanterns standing ready, an awe-inspiring army. And another projection, a living planet wrapped in emerald light, ancient and vast, larger than Oa itself. Green Lantern Mogo. David's eyes narrowed. Green Lantern power is born of will. Anything with self-will could become a lantern. The Corps had included many strange entities. Mogo, a sentient planet, was their ultimate trump card. In comic lore, a single strike by Mogo once wiped out a quarter of the Yellow Lantern Corps. Trying to intimidate me? David sneered. Guardians. He didn't yet have the power to destroy a planet on his own, not compared to cosmic bodies, but within the sun's gravity, he could do things others could not. You won't only take back the 2 rings you claim belong to you, he said. You'll lose a dozen more. David reached out. The dozen Green Lanterns who had attacked them most fiercely froze. With a gesture, immense force ripped their arms from their sockets. Violent, brutal, blood and plasma drifting into the void. The rings detached and flew into David's palm, thrashing as if trying to return to their owners, but they were trapped like insects in amber, able only to tremble. Dozens of Green Lanterns surged to protect their wounded comrades, furious at David's brutality. But they remembered how easily he had swept them aside before, and with the Guardians projected above them, none dared act. How dare you, young life form? The Guardians thundered. The little blue men, large heads, short bodies, identical faces, flared with righteous fury. You provoke the Corps that has guarded the universe for eons. They had just demonstrated the Corps' might, and yet David had grabbed more rings in front of them. It was brazen. Their professed lack of emotion meant little. They were still beings with pride. If you used us, you should have expected this consequence, David said, voice cold. If you're unhappy, unleash your Corps. He was not trying to be theatrical. Even if they acknowledged his help against Parallax, the Guardians could not claim sole credit and then demand the fruits of that help. The Green Lantern Corps' reputation, invincible one-on-one but historically fallible in numbers, was no deterrent to him. Under this star's light, the sun's gravity pervades everything. David continued, pointing to the sun. If your living planet Mogo dares to enter this system, I will hurl it into the sun. Test me. Silence fell. The Guardians' expressions flickered between anger and uncertainty. No one wanted to gamble with David's ability to manipulate gravity in the sun's field. His strength was no longer something the ordinary lanterns could handle. Sheer numbers were useless. Mogo was the Corps' ultimate weapon. Replaceable Green Lanterns could be recruited, but there was only one sentient planet. They could not risk it. You eliminated Parallax and solved a crisis for the universe, the Guardians said finally, their faces stern. If we discover you use the rings to do harm, the Corps will pursue you to death, no matter where you run. The threat carried the weight of duty, but it was thin as a response. The Guardians then closed their projection and ordered the Corps to retreat. One moment they had been immovable, refusing to rest until the rings were reclaimed. The next they sent wounded lanterns away under their command. The Corps members, bound by ancient laws to obey, left wounded and dejected. Tomarai exhaled, conflicted at David's savage maiming of comrades, and followed. It's over just like that? Clark muttered, stunned. Space emptied in an instant, save for the drifting debris of torn limbs. Clark had clenched his fists in fear that his brother's defiance would spark a war with the universe's police. He had braced for a siege of Green Lanterns. Instead, they simply withdrew. David, looking at the departing starfield, scoffed. Those selfish old geezers, compromising when they can't win. Not their first, not their second. He thought of past betrayals. Krypton, Darkseid, the Guardians had compromised before. Losing a dozen rings was nothing to them. David planned to reprogram the dozen rings software with his will, keeping most stored and giving 2 to Jonathan and Martha Kent. Mom and Dad should have the ability to protect themselves, he reasoned. There was still plenty of will embedded in those rings, enough for dozens of fights. The rest he would stash away. Kryptonite liquid, a sacred trident, a Green Lantern ring, Promethean metal. David's mind flicked through the objects he'd collected, picturing a kind of trophy room. Meanwhile, the newspapers screamed headlines. Over 1,000 dead. A space monster driven off by the Purple Light Man and Superman. Coast City saved. This was the first public confirmation of contact with extraterrestrial life. Superman and the Purple Light Man, long rumored to be aliens, were suddenly center stage. David's role in the Parallax fight, dramatic and devastating, drew attention. The formerly anonymous vigilante was suddenly the subject of fevered online debate. The name Purple Light Man is too bland for the hero who saved a city, readers argued. A new title emerged, Overman. Borrowing the super concept attached to Superman, people embraced it. Overman and Superman were celebrated together, though the public did not know that Parallax had once drained an entire living planet and that Clark and David had stopped far more than a single city from destruction. Luthor watched the freshly printed papers with a cynical smile in a secret underground lab. 2 alien monsters chasing off another alien monster was all the populace wanted to celebrate. He compared it to ecological disasters caused by invasive species, the brown tree snake in America, the cane toad in Australia, examples of how alien introductions could wreck entire ecosystems. Short-sighted fools, Luthor muttered, turning a small globe on his desk. Given a chance, an invasive species will destroy the native life, intentionally or not. Cold and ruthless, Luthor was determined to eliminate Superman and the Purple Light Man. They had already impeded his operations, and as powerful as nuclear weapons, their existence posed an ongoing threat to his plans. People only grow when they hurt, he told himself. If the Coast City attack had succeeded, the world would be terrified. Nations would desperately start researching defenses, shaking off complacency and possibly triggering a technological leap. Instead, heroes had saved the day, and mankind returned to its arrogance. Luthor tossed the paper aside and opened a file he had watched repeatedly, footage of Superman fighting a glowing green assailant. He analyzed the scenes, steel and masonry shredded, Superman staggered and coughing blood. A fighter of barely 100 tons can send Superman reeling. Green light must weaken him, he said, savoring the thought. He uncapped a small vial of fluorescent green battery solution and studied it, stroking his chin. Radiation from a meteorite, something from space, grants mutants on Earth powers and, oddly, seems to counter him. His lips curved into a predator's smile. And the purple light, or Overmen. His eyes grew cold. I wonder if you're vulnerable to kryptonite. 2 days ago, the Typhon project had been declared a complete success. A fleet of iron-gray craft sailed through the starfield. Behind a viewport, General Zod, broad-bearded like barbed steel, stared at the river of stars. He carried a soldier's discipline and authority. How ironic, he said, voice hard. We were sentenced by the Council to 200 years in the Phantom Zone for rebelling. After we escaped, we found ourselves alone, the only surviving Kryptonians. They had left a derelict outpost, resupplied but found no kin. No home remained. Beside him, Faora, tall, fierce, tragic, pressed her palm to the glass, grief shadowing her features. Krypton was gone. Everything she had known had been erased in an instant. Krypton fell because of decay, Zod said, controlling the emotion he showed briefly. Then he became the Iron Commander again, voice ringing through the ship, stirring his officers. The corrupt council indulged in comfort and neglected our destiny. They feared our potential and retreated. That cowardice led to Krypton's destruction. The officers, excited, angry, listened as he paced, then rallied with him. I will rebuild Krypton. The Kryptonian Empire will rise from the ashes. Let mighty Krypton rule the universe again. Rebuild Krypton, they cried, falling to one knee, shouting with fists to chests. Rule the universe. Zod's hand struck the viewport, pointing like an arrow. We will retrieve the codex that Jor-El launched into space. Jor-El knew Krypton's doom and did not warn our people. He encoded Krypton's legacy into his child and sent him into the universe. That child should have been ours, a new life for Krypton. That should have been our future, the officers roared. Soldiers, Zod commanded, voice like steel. We go to reclaim it. Chapter 133. I am your father, Carl, K. Mom's raspberry pie is always so good. That afternoon, after saving the city, David and Clark came home ravenous and devoured a big slice each. Clark gave a satisfied thumbs up. Eat slowly. Martha smiled, the relief plain on her face that her two grown sons had come home safe after fighting monsters. Jonathan stood nearby with a cup of black tea, a smile he couldn't hide. He was proud. He'd raised two sons who were heroes, who had driven back alien terrors and saved a city. David set two Green Lantern rings on the table between them. Are these those alien rings? Martha asked. No, these are different, David said, then briefly explained what had happened. The couple exchanged glances, unsure how to respond to their son's anger at the hypocritical guardians of the universe, those same guardians who had, in his telling, stolen a dozen rings. Life on a farm had taught them that official didn't always mean righteous. The U.S. military had once tried to snatch their eldest for experiments. They understood what it meant to distrust power. David, if you take their rings, won't they come looking for trouble? Jonathan asked, his face taut with worry. Anything that involved the wider universe made him anxious for Earth. They won't start a war over two rings, David said, trying for reassuring. Those guardians are compromised. He told them not to worry and that they only needed to learn how to use the rings for self-defense. After dinner, in the small yard, Martha and Jonathan experimented with the lantern rings. With willpower, they molded one into a tractor and a lawnmower, the other into a watering can and gardening shears. Simple, practical things. They laughed like people who'd never had a day at an amusement park in years. These rings are like a universal toolbox, Jonathan said as he conjured wrenches and screwdrivers out of thin air, amazed at the convenience. You don't have to rummage through the attic. Martha, spraying a row of fruit trees with a materialized sprayer, nodded. If we could use these freely, the farm would save so much this year. David hesitated, then reminded them, they're also weapons, for self-defense. He scratched his head. To his parents, who had never wanted to harm anyone, the rings produced useful tools. But the rings were also immensely powerful. They could lift hundreds of tons and grant fast flight. Even if Martha and Jonathan used them only for chores, those two capabilities were enough. Clark, who'd been quieter than usual, pulled David aside. You said you had contact with Atlantis, an ancient, high-tech underwater civilization. They might know more about Kryptonians? David looked at Clark, who seemed nervous to ask, and nodded. Why do you ask? Clark, finally learning where he'd come from in the night sky, wanted information. The Lantern Rings database had almost nothing about Kryptonians. If Atlantis had kept records of the world's old secrets, maybe they had more. David thought for a moment. Atlantis's records mention an alien ship that landed at the North Pole a long time ago. Clark froze, eyes wide. A Kryptonian ship? It looked a lot like a Kryptonian exploration vessel, David said. He explained how, at the height of their empire, Kryptonians sent explorers across the cosmos until their own rulers grew afraid. They recalled what happened when ordinary citizens, irradiated by a yellow sun, could resist Kryptonian rule. The High Council pulled back, forbade exposure to yellow sun, and withdrew their push to colonize. Many exploration ships had been abandoned, some possibly stranded on places like Earth. Clark's excitement leaked out. If there's a ship in the ice, and if I can activate it, maybe I could meet Jor-El. David smiled, understanding. Clark had spent his life craving answers about his origin. Even an artificial intelligence that replicated Jor-El's personality and wisdom would satisfy some of that loneliness. And if the ship broadcast, it could also attract others, Zod and his followers, who would trace that signal to Earth. That risk worried David a little, but he also saw a chance to help Clark find closure and maybe draw a few Kryptonians to fight him instead of the city. David watched his parents grow comfortable with the rings over the next few days. Wearing them around the farm, Jonathan and Martha fell easily back into their simple life. After some novelty, they preferred the familiar. Clark, however, couldn't resist. After a few days policing the city, he flew north to the pole. David stayed home for 2 days and then returned to Atlantis. At the bottom of the sea, in the long empty throne room of the Atlantis Palace, David sat on the throne and summoned Mera. Several Green Lantern rings drifted toward her. "You look different somehow," Mera said as she approached. Only a few days had passed since he'd last seen her, but she seemed harder, more seasoned, more like a stateswoman who'd had to make brutal choices. David had read the reports. She'd crushed dissenters, dragged them into deep dungeons to secure his rule. It had made things quieter on the surface, but brewed deeper resentment beneath. "Growth happens after hard choices," Mera added quietly. David smiled at the words without catching the full edge beneath them. He knew what she had done, and he approved of the results. For him, a restrained populace that didn't actively rebel was useful. Mera's suppression had bought stability and, for David's purposes, political capital. "These are the Green Lantern rings?" she asked suddenly, eyes widening. "How did you get them? 3 of them? You recognize them?" David raised an eyebrow. Mera's expression went still. Atlantis's legends spoke of a time when a Green Lantern fought alongside them, back when an 8-year-old Darkseid had led an army to Earth, and the gods, Amazons, humans, and Atlanteans had stood together. A Green Lantern had been among their defenders and had died in that battle. A lantern ring flies off when its bearer dies and seeks the next chosen. If you intercepted them deliberately, that's dangerous. "They'll be studied," David said. "Assign Atlantis' best scientists. I want a stable way to recharge and replicate the tech." Mera hesitated. The Lantern Corps divides the universe into thousands of sectors and has kept it in order for eons. Their power is immense. If she'd been honest, she was also thinking of consequences. If the Corps came looking, what then? But for now, having David on the throne was better than Orm. Atlantis was isolated. Its people had no idea the surface world had been thrown into chaos by space monsters. 3 rings without owners means 3 Green Lanterns are dead. "What happened on land?" she asked finally. David waved the question away. He had other priorities. Focus on research. Open permissions. If you have to disassemble them, do it. Atlantis mastered infinite energy tech long ago. Reverse engineering these rings is not beyond you. Mera's eyes narrowed at his description of the Guardians of the Universe. They bully the weak and fear the strong, a belief David had stated as fact. If he'd experienced that firsthand, it was chilling. She bowed her head, voice low. "I understand." Inside, Mera felt like she stood on a thin sheet of ice. She had to keep her people in line. This man who had conquered Atlantis easily might be stronger and more calculating than anyone realized. She remembered how he'd left for a few days, then returned suddenly, catching dissent unawares. For a moment she imagined him missing a purge, and she felt a flash of resentment. But she kept it in, clenched her fists, and obeyed. David peered out over the palace and idly wondered about Clark. I hope Clark activated the ship and found his father. North Pole, buried thousands of meters under ice. Inside a vast ship frozen for millennia, Clark stood at the central console. He took off the necklace he'd always kept tucked under his shirt, fingers trembling a little despite the strength that could lift a warship. He held the black, stamp-like device and, after a deep breath, slid it into the matching slot. Mechanical female voices came alive. "System activated. Diagnostics complete. Operating normally. Guided imagery authorized." From beyond the central chamber, a figure in black noble robes, calm, scholarly, eyes full of sorrow, walked in. He regarded Clark with quiet intensity and paused. "You've grown into a man, Cal," the figure said softly. If Lara could see this moment. "Who are you?" Clark managed. "I am your father, Jor-El." Chapter 134. Are you from Earth? 4K2. I am your father, Kal-El. The projection of Kal-El's intelligence paused, then continued. At least his consciousness, his projection. "My name is Jor-El." "Kal-El, is that my name?" Clark felt detached from the world for a moment. The answer he'd been chasing for nearly 20 years was right there. Seeing, of all things, his biological father, he opened his mouth, unsure where to begin. I have so many questions. My son, there's no need to rush. I will answer all your questions." Jor-El's eyes were patient, benevolent. "We have plenty of time." That evening, a cool autumn breeze swept across the farm. They sat at the dinner table. Clark had only taken a few bites of rice but couldn't stop smiling. "I found them," he said suddenly. Jonathan paused with his spoon, confused. David had returned earlier after entrusting the lantern ring to the Atlanteans for study. Seeing the joy and peace on Clark's face, David understood immediately. "Thank you, little brother," he said softly. Clark turned to his parents, excitement spilling from him. "My people, my parents, I finally know where I come from." Jonathan froze. Martha's mouth fell open in disbelief. For a moment she wanted to ask something but couldn't bring herself to speak. "What's wrong, Mom? Dad?" Clark asked, puzzled by their stunned silence. "This is good, Clark. You've found your origins, your home," Jonathan managed, though he sounded shaken. He fumbled in his pocket for a cigarette he never smoked and realized he hadn't brought one, an odd, helpless moment. "You won't be leaving us," he added quickly, as if to reassure himself. David tried to calm them. Their adopted son of 20 years had found his biological home and family. The next step, inevitably, would be to return to that distant planet, if it still existed. "My home was destroyed by a planetary core explosion," Clark said quietly. "My biological parents died in that blast. The only thing they managed to do was to send me to Earth." "Don't be sad, child," Jor-El's projection had told him. "I never met them, but I can imagine they were good parents." Martha rose and embraced her son, stroking his hair. Jonathan looked at Clark and tried to steady him with a father's voice. Half a world away, at a United States Space Detection Station, General Swanwick was led into a briefing room. On the large display, an unfamiliar ship hung in low Earth orbit. "What is it? A comet? An asteroid?" he asked. "Comets don't correct their orbits, General," the director answered, "and it's too large to be overlooked. Amateur astronomers can see it through backyard telescopes. I had to notify you before it caused panic." "Have you tried to contact them?" "Yes," the director said, voice tight, "but they haven't answered." Swanwick's gaze swept the team. The craft looked black and rigid, militaristic in design, Kryptonian in style. Silence in the face of signals, the director added, often had a meaning of its own. Swanwick thought of the young Kryptonian he'd seen flying over Metropolis the past few days. "Be ready. Earth may face a challenge," he said, and left orders in his wake. Back at the Kent house, the football game on TV flickered and was interrupted by an urgent bulletin. A live image of a ship near Earth appeared. The anchor, visibly shaken, announced that an advanced alien vessel had been detected in orbit. Jonathan sat up. "That's the Kryptonian mothership." Clark recognized the shape at once. Jor-El had told him Krypton was gone, that all others had perished. "So Zod came after all," he said. David raised an eyebrow. After hearing Clark's story about the ship at the North Pole and what happened when he activated it, he'd expected this, just not so quickly. "Impatient to reclaim the Codex and rebuild Krypton, are you?" he muttered. Static crackled, and the house went dark. "Power outage?" Martha asked, drying her hands and stumbling out into the living room. The television screens showed only static, then a single voice repeating a phrase, as if calibrating. "You are not alone." Jonathan pulled out his phone. The same message played there. "It's a global signal intrusion," Clark said. "Different channels, different countries. Every screen, every speaker carried the same line in different tongues." Clark knew exactly who the "you" meant. "Is that ship looking for you?" Jonathan asked. "It should be," Clark said, solemn. He looked at David. "We might have to prepare." "You don't want to give your long-lost countrymen a friendly greeting?" David said with a hint of dark amusement. After meeting Jor-El, Clark had changed, less impulsive, more aware of what his life and mission meant. "Jor-El sent you to this world to guide this fledgling race, to be a symbol and a safeguard." "They may not be coming with good intentions," Clark warned. He explained what Jor-El had told him about Krypton's end, how the planet had become corrupt and rigid, how social roles were genetically reinforced. Operators remained operators, soldiers remained soldiers. Those who could pilot a mothership had been high-ranking military before Krypton's fall. The remnant that could assemble and send a war fleet were, by nature and training, fighters and conquerors, with conquest and battle in their blood. Their arrival did not bode well. An image of a tall, severe man appeared on screens worldwide, coming through the interference with an unhurried but undeniable authority. "I am General Zod," he said. "I come from a distant world, across the starways to your planet, because one of my people is hiding among you." "Kal-El," Earthlings resemble us, but they are not us. You play at being a hero and playing house on this world. If you truly care for this world, I give you 24 hours to surrender." Clark clenched his fist. The worst-case scenario had unfolded, a full-scale threat against an entire planet aimed at him. The math was terrifying. Any Kryptonian exposed to a yellow sun could become a force capable of world-ending destruction. David grinned. "What do you plan to do?" "You're not worried?" Clark asked. David spread his hands. "What is there to fear? I grew up with them. I know their strengths and their limits." Clark had no retort. David's casual confidence eased the tension in the room. Still, Jonathan pressed, voice tight. "You can't take that ordering word lightly. Surrender." "They're hostile." Looking at his mother, eyes rimmed with worry, Clark made the decision. "I won't let Earth be threatened because of me, not while you and David are here." The invasion of every screen and device sparked global debate. Superman is an alien, people said. The rumor confirmed. What does he want here? Fear drove a chorus demanding action. Hand him over. Earth can't be put at risk because of one being. Is the end nigh? Some asked. Others defended him. Superman had saved lives, had even saved a city alongside Overman. But the voices calling for his surrender drowned the defenders. Humanity showed what it often does best, the glory of compassion, but also the selfishness of fear. At sunrise over Metropolis, Clark hovered above the city, scrolling through the flood of comments on his phone. David floated beside him. "This is humanity," David said. "Are you disappointed?" Clark, now wearing a new suit instead of the old blue tee and cape, let out a small, rueful smile. The suit was dark blue, woven from a high-density material into a form-fitting battle uniform, practical and solemn without losing approachability. "If public opinion alone could defeat me, you'd be underestimating me," he said, pocketing his phone. He felt strangely melancholy. "You shouldn't have come, little brother." In low orbit, the Kryptonian mothership had launched a smaller vessel. Clark's supervision watched it head toward them. Being able to hack the world's electronics, Zod knew exactly where Clark and David were. "If it gets dangerous, don't worry about me." "You sound like you've lost faith in yourself," David said, "and you don't trust me to handle them." Clark was no longer the impetuous boy. But Zod's arrival had been accelerated by David's actions, and Clark had not had the arc of losses and hardening that might have steeled him for this. Kryptonians are shaped from birth. Warrior sons become warriors. Mechanic sons become repairmen. "I'm a scientist's son," Clark said, voice tight. He was ready to fight, even to sacrifice himself, but he didn't assume he matched Zod's strength. "Don't underestimate what a scientist can do," David replied. "And don't underestimate yourself." A black ship descended. David chuckled, calm in the face of what came next. The ship hovered and opened its ramp. A poised, sharp-featured woman stepped forward and stood at the edge of the open hatch. She wore the armor and bearing of Krypton's military sub-officer. "I am Fiora," she announced. "The general has been expecting you, Kal-El." She looked at the House of El crest on Clark's chest and then scrutinized David hovering beside him. Her brow lifted in surprise. "Are you an Earthling?" she asked. "Who are you, an Earthling?" Fiora looked him up and down. During her search for information about Clark, this man had kept appearing, strong, almost like a Kryptonian warrior. Yet among the powerful races they knew, none matched him. "What else?" she asked. "I'm not one of the people General Zod called," David said. "Called?" Fiora's voice went cold. "Called," David sneered. "You flew your mothership over Earth uninvited, and you call it a summons? This is Earth. Know your place." A native of a backward world dared to speak to a Kryptonian officer like that. Fiora, clad in black battle armor, curled her lip, about to answer, when Zod's voice crackled over her helmet comms. "I understand." Fiora nodded into the channel, then fixed David with a warning look. "General Zod is very curious about you. You may board the ship with Kal-El. Do not make any foolish moves." David didn't bother to be polite. Zod had dozens of followers, high-ranking officers who'd risen with him. Ordinary soldiers weren't even qualified to be imprisoned with him in the Phantom Zone. Dozens of Kryptonians together were dangerous. "It's better to fight in space," he replied, and as he boarded the warship with Clark, he glanced out a porthole at the star-splattered black. If war broke out on Earth, the destructive power of so many Kryptonians would be catastrophic. "By the way," he added coolly, Your atmosphere is highly toxic to species not strong enough. The small ship carrying them had been drawn into the belly of the massive mothership that hung in orbit. Before the hatch opened, Fiora crossed her arms and regarded David with arrogant disdain, as if waiting for him to fail. It's not too late to leave. Whether I'm strong or not is none of your concern, David said. He did not need to breathe. What atmosphere could kill an immortal with nothing but air? A burst of steam hissed as the hatch cycled open. At the transparent porthole, a tall, severe figure stood with his hands behind his back, facing the void and the warm light of distant stars. Kal-El, Zod said, turning. His voice was sharp and metallic, owned like a blade. I finally meet you. Clark frowned. The man wasn't the monstrous tyrant he'd imagined. In addition to the broad, powerful frame Clark expected, Zod's face held something else, a deep, heavy sorrow between his brows, as if a general perpetually burdened by the fate of his people. It's General Zod, Fiora snapped at Clark's too casual address. It's all right. He's not yet familiar with our customs, Zod said with an easy gesture. Zod? All your people are on this ship? David counted 7 or 8 faces within the cabin and sensed several dozen more through his shield. He didn't want to lose track of anyone once fighting began. Our home world has been destroyed. Its destruction freed us, criminals who had been imprisoned by the Council. Zod spoke plainly, with the confidence of a man who expected his words to carry weight. What remains of the Kryptonians are what you see of me. Even with only a few dozen survivors, he believed he could take Earth. David smiled and stopped wasting words. He opened a channel between Earth and the Moon, using a manipulation of force fields and gravity that was invisible but steady. David, something's wrong, Clark said suddenly, dizzy. His balance faltered, and David caught him, watching Zod closely. Poison gas? What kind of agent could fell a Kryptonian bathed in a yellow sun? Kal-El, Zod said with a hint of contempt. You grew up on this planet for 20 years and have become adapted to it. It is pitiable for one of our kind to be so ill-suited to our own atmosphere. The ring, David reminded him. Clark slipped his hand into his pocket, produced the Green Lantern ring, and clicked it onto his finger. The ring registered his condition, activated its healing protocols, and painted a green hood over his head like a helmet, a protective suit. Zod's eyes narrowed. You recognize it, Zod said. David was slightly surprised. Krypton had practiced seclusion for generations. Contact with the Green Lantern Corps had to be ancient history. There are many wondrous things in the universe. My heart has always longed for the stars. Zod's reply was slow and cold. Longed for the stars? Perhaps you mean conquest and colonization. David's expression hardened. He recited the names of powerful races Zod listed, Zarnians, Durlans, Daxamites, as if they were old acquaintances. Zod was skeptical of the idea that David could be an Earthling. How could such a weak world produce such strength? None of those, David said lightly. The mothership shuddered. Someone at the helm shouted into the consoles. David's smile was steady. He knew every race Zod had named. The violent, indestructible Zarnians like Lobo's people, the mimic Durlans, the Daxamites who mirrored Kryptonian power. Then the ship's operator cried out, "We're off orbit. We're being pulled." The mothership, hundreds of meters across, belched engine fire as if resisting an invisible hand, and yet was dragged with irresistible force. Target, far side of the moon, the pilot reported. Zod's face went hard. He looked at David, who had force field manipulation in his file, with cold fury. David had linked Earth's and the moon's gravities and was pulling the mothership where the sun could not reach. If the sun empowered them, then isolating them from sunlight would strip away certain threats, parallax, sinestro, while other strategic goals could be pursued in shadow. Take him down, Zod barked. Several armored Kryptonian officers surged at David. Clark, still uncertain of Zod's intentions, threw himself into the fray. David stood like a statue and unleashed a torrent of purple cosmic energy. It struck the charging Kryptonians with devastating force, slamming them into bulkheads and sending the entire mothership shuddering. This isn't about you. You're not my target, David said. Zod's eyes flicked toward the ship's interior. The planet-reforming device, the last great technological achievement of Kryptonian civilization, the world engine that could remake atmosphere and gravity. If it were damaged, it could not be fixed with the materials at hand. Zod clenched his fists. "Leave this planet, and I'll pretend none of this happened." "I'd rather this planet remain as it is," David replied. The mothership slammed down onto the moon's cold far side, kicking up a plume of dust and debris that rose for miles. Kryptonians stumbled on the sudden impact. David and Clark launched themselves clear. Clark punched through bulkhead plating and peered at the unfamiliar lunar horizon. Before David could answer, Zod lunged. His fist, iron strong, smashed into Clark's head, shattering the insulating field the lantern ring had formed as if it were glass. Clark's vision spun. He flew backward through the hole. David retaliated, sending a scorching purple wave that hit Zod like a battering ram and hurled him across the lunar plain. Zod skidded and bounced, thrown hundreds of meters. "General!" Fiora and several officers roared and charged. On the moon, with its lower gravity, their speed was terrifying. They seemed to move like lightning until they came within 10 meters of David, when their momentum suddenly bogged down, as if wading through thick tar. David used the lull to climb higher, breaking through the cabin roof and hovering above them, studying the world engine and the armor Kryptonians wore. "This is the last technological crystallization of your civilization, isn't it?" David called down. He had traced Kryptonian outposts and examined their most advanced artifacts. The mothership was a kind of ark for Kryptonian tech. "We wear armor that resists each other's attacks," Zod said, righting himself and checking the scorch marks across his chest plate. "And the world engine can transform a planet's environment. These are top-tier technologies across the cosmos. Even if only we Kryptonians remain, don't look down on us," Fiora spat, and she and the others leapt through the torn hull. They smashed into the lunar surface, skidding across regolith, and the ground exploded into craters. Heat flared, and the stone melted into rivers of glowing rock. These Kryptonians had already been bathed in filtered yellow sunlight by their armor. Their strength and speed were enormous. David met them in the air. Gladiatorial blows cracked against his frame. Fists that could shatter mountains landed on him, and he countered with strikes that sent warriors skimming into the lunar horizon. The fight was fierce, but not decisive. Zod, recovering, wiped lunar dust from his face and looked at Clark hovering nearby. "Kal-El, hand over the codex." He leapt at Clark again. Clark grunted, blocking, dropping to one knee as fissures ran dozens of meters across the moon's crust under his feet. Clark was still young. Zod, mature and battle-hardened, seemed stronger. "Before Krypton's destruction, your father Jor-El broke into the Genesis chamber and stole the codex, the DNA archive of our people. Without it, Krypton cannot be rebuilt," Zod said. His hand became an iron vise, and he sent Clark flying with a brutal punch. "You want to rebuild Krypton?" Clark's breath hurt. He pushed himself up and met Zod's glare. "I don't know what you're talking about. I've never seen any codex." Clark had searched the ship that brought him to Earth. It was all he had of his home and his parents, hoping to find anything else his parents had hidden besides the black emblem. It had yielded nothing. "Impossible," Zod snapped. "Are you telling me Jor-El risked everything to steal the codex only to die with it? He must have hidden it on the ship that brought you." Zod's anger became physical. He kicked and spun with the cold precision of a born officer. Clark caught and blocked, then was blasted backward again. "On Krypton, your fighting skills wouldn't earn you a corporal's stripes." Zod grabbed Clark by the collar and lifted him. He sneered, an impatient, contemptuous fury bubbling beneath his voice. Kal-El might be lying. Maybe the codex hadn't been sent to Earth. The possibility left Zod unsettled and furious. Clark's eyes flashed red. Energy coalesced, and a searing heat ray shot from his vision, striking Zod's helmet and snapping his head back. The general released Clark and staggered. Clark surged, hammering Zod with a series of blows that threw up white puffs of lunar dust and left the ground scoured in his wake. "Zod," Clark panted as he pinned the general and rained punches into him. "If you want to rebuild Krypton, I might be willing to help. We don't have to fight." A Kryptonian officer went flying, gouging a long trench across the lunar surface. Above the chaos, David hovered, his face cold as stone. He watched the exchange for a moment, then asked in a voice that carried across the dust-choked air, clipped and dangerous. "Clark, do you know where they plan to rebuild Krypton?" Chapter 136. Start World Engine now. Smallville, the Kent Farm. The insect chorus from the wheat fields had a thin, grating quality tonight. At the doorway, Martha stood in her apron, hands tightly clasped, staring up at the distant sky. Inside, Jonathan paced and stopped periodically to look down at the Green Lantern ring on his finger, jaw clenched. The news had just announced that the colossal alien ship had left Earth's orbit. They didn't know what would happen next. Fear sat heavy in the house. Weapons from Superman's homeworld? A general? Jonathan murmured. In a secured bunker elsewhere, Luthor sat alone before a projection screen, watching satellite footage captured by a Luthor Group satellite, the gigantic, flame-spewing ship being dragged back toward the moon. He smiled coldly and slipped into a new high-density alloy battlesuit. The armor had once been bulky and fortress-like. Now it hugged his body, sleek and lethal. This suit is just an accessory, he thought, feeling power surge through him. 20 years earlier, meteorites had struck nearby towns. Radiation had mutated some people. Luthor used his corporate reach to track down those with records, to collect samples. He poured billions into the Typhon project and engineered the bloodlines for 10,000 monsters. Excluding forms that would make him look monstrous, he had synthesized, combined, hundreds of abilities into himself. He clenched his fist and felt the volcanic force inside him, a single man who could hunt gods. I'm not going to be a hero. Heroes end up dead. But this time, I'll be the savior, he mused, cold and ambitious. With a final sneer, he surged upward, shattered the bunker roof, broke the sound barrier, and sped for the moon. Once the fighting between the alien factions ended, he would swoop in, take everything, and be the undisputed victor. With that kind of fame, running for president would be a stone-cold certainty. Out above the moon, the battle unfolded in brutal clarity. Clark heard David's calm assessment. Earth has nurtured fragile Earthlings, and tightened his jaw. He glanced at Zod, who lay sprawled, and signaled to him to answer. Zod's lips were split and swollen. He spat blood, then backhanded Clark so hard the Man of Steel was sent flying. Zod rose, fury in his eyes. These insects on Krypton couldn't even defeat humans, he said scornfully. But they resemble us. This planet shares many traits with Krypton. I will use the world engine. There is enough energy to terraform this world and rebuild Krypton. He looked at the blue planet in the distance as if it were already his. With a yellow sun, every Kryptonian born here would gain power from birth. Even if this Earth meets the same fate as Krypton, new Kryptonians will survive. I will not let what happened to Krypton happen again. Clark's eyes widened. He launched himself at Zod, determined to stop the plan. But their similarities in physiology meant the fight was brutal and even. Zod was a seasoned military leader with years of training. He had anticipated Clark's heat vision and other attacks. The general's strikes drove Clark back again and again. Blood stained Clark's mouth. His chest ached. David would have flown to his aid, but a pack of Kryptonians, dozens of warriors who could bound miles into the sky, descended on him like a hunting pack. They couldn't pierce him easily, but they pinned him down long enough to make things difficult. David's mind flickered to Krypton's heyday. In the universe, beings as powerful as him were rare, yet here he was pressed by dozens of Kryptonians. At its peak, Krypton might have held hundreds of millions of its people. No wonder wherever Kryptonians went, they became empires. He let off a blast of gravitational energy and sent 2 attackers tumbling, but 5 or 6 more bore down. David used a hand to seize several midair and slammed them into the moon, carving out a crater dozens of meters deep. A flash of steel, a sting on his cheek. He touched it and tasted blood. Fiora had landed with a black dagger of unknown metal and was provocatively licking the blade, thinner than paper and wicked. Your skin absorbs force strangely, she taunted, but tiny, precise blades must be difficult to stop. David brushed his wound away. Not bad. A scratch. Mosquito bite small. But after so much effort, one of you finally draws blood. Even weapons and armor forged to withstand the yellow sun could hurt him with enough force and precision. He knew he had to be careful. He spread a gravitational field around himself and barreled through the crowd like a cannonball. The immense gravity pressed the attackers down, their punches and blades crushed toward the ground. He hurled Kryptonian after Kryptonian into distant craters. Their steel bodies flew back up like insectile cockroaches, but damage had been done, and David had the upper hand. There's no sunlight here, no solar recharge for Kryptonians. That helps, he thought. In 30 minutes, he could lay dozens low. Seizing Fiora's arm as she lunged, David glanced toward Clark and saw his friend battered. Clark was alone with Zod, and Zod fought like a general, adaptable, brutal. A strike sent Clark careening across the lunar surface, carving a deep trench. He lay at the trench's end, clutching his chest, breath shallow. He feared his ribs were broken. Even if they were kin, Clark couldn't match Zod's experience and training in close-quarters combat. Zod adapted to the moon's gravity like it was flat ground, closing with a powerful bound and grabbing Clark like a hunter. "Where is the ship that brought you to Earth?" Zod demanded. "I'll never tell you. Abandon this monstrous plan," Clark gasped, his voice cracked with pain and anger. "Even if you rebuild Krypton, slaughter billions, use Earth as a sacrifice, those new Kryptonians wouldn't be happy either. Gravity, atmosphere, all the conditions of Krypton were hostile to Earth creatures, and the ship's coordinates, where the ship had been, were where Clark's adoptive parents lived. He could not betray them. Zod tightened his grip like an iron vice. "You won't keep your secrets. We'll see how strong your will is on that fragile planet." He moved to begin the interrogation. At that moment, David, who had already felled more than a dozen warriors, launched a scorching torrent of energy that struck Zod and sent him tumbling back. Clark staggered upright and frantically used the lantern ring to mend his injuries, but repairing a Kryptonian body, densely strong and mountain-like, demanded far more energy than the ring usually expended for human wounds. The ring's glow flickered as its reserves drained. Clark stopped after stabilizing his ribs. He needed to conserve power. "We have to act now," David said. Zod barked, furious at being interrupted. Fiora and the other Kryptonian warriors erupted into motion, stamping the ground and leaping like comets toward David. "Then this is where you die," they snarled. David's gravity field slowed their approach. He produced a steel tube and poured its contents onto his palms, rubbing it across his hands like lotion. The green liquid glowed and emitted a faint radiation. He flashed forward and punched Fiora cleanly in the face. She was thrown into a crater wall miles away, but then a weakening wave washed over her. Her knees buckled as the green solution's effects took hold. She touched the smear of green and paled. "That glow," she whispered. After Krypton's destruction, Zod's core had scavenged debris and equipment. They had once found a green crystal formed from planetary core rock in the explosion that emitted a light that caused Kryptonians pain and weakness. Weakness. "It's like that stone." "Don't come near him," she croaked to her comrades. David had brought kryptonite solution. It was weaker than raw kryptonite radiation, but still debilitating. He had used the liquid because pure kryptonite was gone. He could spray or smear it to weaken them. One by one, warriors who bore the green on their faces stumbled. Some managed to wipe at it with the lunar dust and stand again. Space's background radiation also reduced the solution's potency. David lifted a finger and loosed purple energy rays that knocked down anyone still affected by the liquid. A cold, calculating glare narrowed Zod's eyes. The battlefield had shifted in an instant. One mistake, one hesitation, could cost them everything. He acted quickly, issuing a command through his suit. "Activate the world engine. Now." The ship's AI obeyed without question. The mothership's tail disengaged, and a towering device with 3 great legs and hundreds of meters of height detached, spewing fire as it rose. From its center, a mirror-smooth, mercury-like surface extended, and a mechanical arm composed of glittering silver particles uncoiled like a giant metallic python. The world engine, one of Krypton's most advanced planetary machines, moved with lightning speed. Zod's voice was cold and final. "Destroy non-Kryptonian life." David fired purple rays at the steel arm, but they only produced ripples along its surface. The machine's silver tendril ignored the attacks and continued to close on him. Kryptonite weakened living Kryptonians, but it could not hobble Kryptonian machinery. The world engine could reshape a planet's terrain and environment at will. It was a weapon capable of turning a world into a new Krypton. Zod had hunted former Kryptonian colonies across the stars to find one such machine. David's gravity field slowed the tentacle as it entered the field, making it feel as if it were slogging through a quagmire. The machine, however, compensated instantly. The world engine re-aimed with terrifying precision. A concentrated gravity beam, capable of pulverizing mountains, fired. The very ground within a 100-mile radius trembled as lunar dust shivered and was blasted away. "No!" Clark roared, eyes bloodshot with fury at the sight. He had never seen the world engine up close, but knew enough. This was the device Zod had boasted about, the weapon that could remold a planet's shape. The several-meter-thick gravity beam slammed into David. His own defensive field strained and failed. He groaned as the beam ripped him backward like a rag, smashing him through the rim of a 100-meter crater. For a staggering instant, he was flung with uncontrollable force through the moon's surface, across miles of emptiness, a cometary streak of destruction. In a burst of speed, he shot far into space. "Zod!" Clark screamed, veins bulging in his neck, rage throwing him forward. He charged at Zod with a fury unlike anything before. Chapter 137, Compromise Cannot Defeat the Enemy. It hit him like a mountain falling from the sky. A concentrated gravity beam from the world engine slammed into David, whipping him outward. His own gravity manipulation couldn't withstand it. A weapon capable of terraforming a planet, he thought through the impact. My gravity control is still too weak to resist the world engine. The beam hurled him more than 1,000 miles from the moon in a single breath. David clutched his chest as pressure bruised his organs. His superhuman body began to knit itself back together. He pushed back toward the moon as fast as he could. "Kal-El, hand over the codex, or you're next!" On the lunar surface, Zod charged at Clark. They met in a furious collision, fists and bodies exchanging blows that sent both of them skidding back. Zod rose, rubbing his cheek where bone throbbed. He tasted something unfamiliar in the force of Jor-El's sun. Off the horizon, a purple streak hurtled back toward Earth, and Zod's lips tightened. Clark surged forward again, rage barely contained. "I don't know anything about a codex, but you've pushed me too far, Zod?" "You will understand," Zod growled. When David, glowing purple and apparently only lightly wounded, began to close, Zod made a hard choice. "World engine, target me, fire the gravity beam." He baited the weapon to blast him away, rather than let David get close. The beam streaked through space and slammed into him. Zod was thrown 1,000 miles beyond the moon, toward the sun. His power helmet had been shattered by Clark earlier. Now, basked in yellow sunlight, strange new strengths began to stir. His eyes flared red. At first, the power swept him like a tidal wave. Then, within seconds, his discipline as a lifelong general steadied it. Supersight, superhearing, heat vision, bioelectric lift, abilities he had long suppressed to avoid losing control, came alive again. "This is easier than I feared," he admitted, and turned toward Earth. The world engine no longer mattered if he could empower himself under the sun. What he wanted was the codex. "Kal-El, whether you know where the codex is or not, I will find it." David realized Zod's destination the instant he saw that trajectory. Clark's alter ego had always been associated with Metropolis. Zod would go straight there. Transforming into a purple streak, David raised his speed, slingshotting from lunar gravity, even as the moon's weak field hampered him. He wasn't slower than Zod. Zod just had a head start. Metropolis, he thought, and pushed harder. Clark reacted instantly. He shot after Zod like a cannonball. The three streaked toward Earth. Zod, furious and powerful. Clark, desperate to stop him. David, determined to protect the meteorite solution he carried. The kryptonite derivative he'd kept precisely to deal with men like Zod. Satellites spun over Earth. Zod tore one from its orbit and hurled it at David. David didn't dodge. Purple beams lanced from his eyes, and he tore through the satellite like an arrow through paper. It exploded, showering debris. Wayne Enterprises had just lost a multi-million-dollar asset. David barely flinched and kept chasing. Down in the Batcave, Bruce Wayne watched the feed go dark and switched to another satellite angle. Alfred stood nearby, calm but worried. "Metropolis," Bruce said simply, and then suited up. His newest creation, more costly and experimental than either Batmobile or Batwing, waited deeper in the cave, the Fenrir armor. Metropolis looked deceptively peaceful. News drones said the alien craft had left orbit. People walked the streets, heads tilted from time to time at the sky. Then a shadow like a burning meteor cut the horizon and slammed through the atmosphere, streaking toward the city. Panic erupted. "Run!" Zod halted above a downtown block as if his inertia were gone. The blast waves from his sudden stop shattered windows. Glass rained down on fleeing citizens. He ignored the screams, eyes cold as red lights. David and Clark hung hundreds of meters away, forced to hold position by the threat of his heat vision. "If you don't want this block ruined," Zod warned, heat building in his gaze. Clark's pupils pinched. He stopped, wary. "Hold on a second," he called, then looked at David. "Stall him. The police are evacuating. Every second we buy lets another person get out." David was already thinking pragmatically. Compromise let an enemy take advantage, but total confrontation would kill innocents. He let a small sigh out and vaporized the kryptonite solution he'd held in his hand, keeping his chest unclenched. Zod relaxed slightly. He didn't know David still had another vial at his waist. David thought home was only seconds away. If he could get close, he could still subdue Zod. Clark reappeared moments later, seizing the small spaceship from a cellar and tossing it onto the street as bait. "Here," he shouted. Police and civilians scrambled. Zod tore the craft apart with casual brutality, finding nothing and erupting into vengeful heat beams that cut through buildings and sliced floors like knives. Hundreds of people still trapped in the damaged structures died instantly. "Give me the Codex, Kal-El, or I will turn this city into ruins," Zod roared, blasting Clark and pinning him through several more buildings. Clark's X-ray vision already revealed dozens more corpses forming across the city. Fury turned his eyes bloodshot. He threw himself at Zod. "I won't let you kill any more people." David had been trying to subdue Zod when a meteor of a figure struck him and knocked him down. The newcomer slammed into the pavement, carving a deep gouge through the street. "Fiora," David spat, recognizing the other Kryptonian. Fiora rose in a new, dust-streaked battlesuit, eyes burning. She slammed a fist forward and compressed the air like a solid wall, sending a crushing column toward David. Her suit isolated her from the meteorite solution's effects. She was untainted and relentless. David countered with cosmic energy and pushed her back, but she clung to him, preventing him from reaching Zod as Clark tried to lure the general away from the city. "Anyone who stands in the way of Krypton's rebirth must be destroyed," Fiora hissed. She had both the authority and the aptitude to deploy the world engine and quickly master new powers. She had come to ensure Zod's plan succeeded. "Need help," a voice boomed. On a nearby rooftop, a gargantuan Fenrir battlesuit, nearly 3 meters tall, limbs thick and forged from unknown alloys, more beast than armor, loomed into view. Its presence felt like a promise of force. Bruce Wayne, inside, fired a grappling hook from the suit. It latched onto one of Fiora's charging legs. With a violent tug, the Fenrir armor yanked the Kryptonian onto the rooftop, interrupting her assault. David looked up, narrowing his eyes. This was no opponent an ordinary person could face, and yet here was Batman, imposing and merciless, pulling the battlefield into a new angle. David raised an eyebrow when he saw the towering Fenrir armor, controlled by Batman, actually stagger Fiora. Bang! A grappling hook lashed out and yanked her off balance. Fiora recovered with lightning speed and launched an upward punch. The force compressed the air into a palpable mass, sending layered shockwaves outward. The massive Fenrir armor, moving like a seasoned fighter, didn't flinch. It deflected her blow and answered with a sweeping punch that slammed her into a rooftop. "Who are you?" the armored figure demanded. The whole building shuddered. Fiora's brow furrowed, her eyes flared, and heat vision stabbed into the Fenrir armor's chest. The armor rocked from the impact, but suffered no real damage. "The alloy used in this armor is almost as strong as Kryptonian armor," David observed. The Fenrir suit also absorbed energy, just like the zero-battle armor the military had used against him. Promethean metal, with a mutable variant mixed in, an Earth-built counter to Kryptonians. "So you're an Earthling," Fiora muttered. Batman's reply was cold and clipped. The Fenrir armor's rear thrusters bellowed flame as it raised an enormous fist and charged. With a sound like a sonic boom, it streaked away in pursuit of Zod and Clark. David watched briefly from midair, then pulled his gaze away. Fenrir, named for the Norse monster, was one of Batman's high-tech contingencies for a rogue Justice League member. Defenses against Kryptonian strength and Red Sun simulation, sensors to predict Flash's movements, systems to confuse Wonder Woman. It was a prototype, not fully outfitted, but its core capabilities were clear. How Bruce Wayne got his hands on Promethean metal? David didn't care. That was the power of Batman's money. He withdrew a vial of kryptonite solution from his belt and rubbed it across his palms. Far on the city's edge, two figures, afterimages against the skyline, clashed. Their shockwaves shattered office glass across blocks, sending terrified crowds scattering. Kal-El, you are a Kryptonian. With the Codex, we can rebuild our destroyed planet, Zod snarled, unleashing a storm of punches. Clark, Kal-El, answered with burning heat. You traitor. Everything you've got to resist me came from Krypton, Zod spat, tearing a steel construction beam free and hurling it like a club. I only know I grew up on Earth, Clark said, voice tight. My parents adopted me, an orphan from another world. They gave me warmth, raised me, and cared for me as their own. Clark's heat vision melted the beam into molten rivulets. You want to destroy Earth. I will never allow it. He gathered every ounce of strength and blasted Zod away. Zod stabilized midair with his bioelectric aura, coiling like a drawn bow to strike again, but David approached from another angle. Zod saw green smeared across David's hands and a look of shocked fury crossed his face. He tried to flee, but a gravitational field seized him, slowing his lightning reflexes into sluggishness. Zod, this is the end. Earth will always be for Earthlings, David declared. No, Zod bellowed. The purple light figure that struck like a meteor filled him with rage and a different kind of fear. Zod never feared death for himself as a warrior, but dying would mean the end of Krypton's chance to be rebuilt. He struck, grief and fury mingling into killing intent. He had expected Kal-El to oppose him. He knew Kal-El would be strong, but another unknown, powerful life form on this weak planet had been an unexpected variable. Bang! David's fist met Zod's head. Zod became a cannonball of smashing force, punching through a building and slamming into a street below, leaving a crater as if a meteor had hit. David's body moved as steady as ever. He watched Zod lie some distance away, bleeding from multiple orifices, concussed, and said slowly, coldly, "How undignified, Zod." Zod gasped, the world swimming red. David's words, mocking and final, sparked a last faint flare of unwillingness in his eyes. He tried to rise, but his head lolled. The kryptonite solution's radiation took hold as David and the others approached, stripping Zod of power. The former supreme commander of the Kryptonians died on an alien world, felled by a single punch from a young being. Is he dead? Clark asked, complexity shadowing his voice as he looked down through the hole in the building. Even if Zod's goal was slaughter and conquest, Clark could feel Zod's twisted loyalty, love for Krypton. Clark, as a Kryptonian, had stood against that hope and destroyed it. That was quite a spirited speech, Clark muttered. You said your parents cared more about your thoughts than their own son, David said, patting Clark's shoulder. Clark flushed, awkward, and looked away. He hadn't expected David to hear that private remark. General, fury and grief coalesced into a shout. The Fenrir armor, incomplete as it was, had been able to hold Fiora only briefly. Once she hit top speed, she'd slipped free and pursued them. Seeing Zod's body left Fiora in disbelief, then turned it to fury. You'll pay for the General's life. With Zod dead, the Kryptonians' hope of rebuilding their world died too. David, Clark, and Batman converged and together overpowered Fiora. They battered through her defenses. The fight ended with David's fist against her face. Bang! Fiora crumpled unconscious. He hadn't delivered a killing blow the way he'd done to Zod. He'd shown the others mercy. David still needed the remaining Kryptonians as emotional assets. One Kryptonian's emotional value, he calculated, was worth hundreds of Amazons. Dozens of them equaled tens of thousands. If these people were put in cells irradiated with red sunlight and left to resent him for destroying their hope, the payoff would be immense. Why he'd killed Zod, though, was simple. Zod was a born leader. Left alive, he would always rally escape attempts and resistance. Better the leader be gone. David telekinetically lifted the unconscious Fiora. With Zod dead, the group accustomed to hierarchy would scatter without a leader and be easier to manage. Batman, still occupying the Fenrir armor, landed slowly and fixed Clark with a hard look. "Are you the Blue Hood?" he asked. Batman's gaze had already identified David as the Purple Light Man. From that and Clark's connection to David, Bruce suspected Clark might be the Blue Hood who had once visited Wayne Manor. Clark, puzzled by the armored suit and the implication, only heard David's aside. "Look at this city," screaming in agony, Superman. "Though unintentional, many here have died because of you." Batman's voice softened only slightly, less hostility than a serious admonition as he turned to leave. Whenever you fly over this city, never forget what you owe it. Clark fell silent. Fighting Zod had wrought destruction across Metropolis. He had tried to save as many as he could, but he had been unable to prevent great loss. Bruce's words were not a declaration of hatred, but a sober reminder. Remember the cost of power and always be prepared. David watched Clark, thinking this might be a necessary lesson for him. After all, David had been the one to point out the Kryptonian ship in the North Pole. He bore some responsibility, but far fewer people had died now than in the original timeline. If this ordeal taught Clark to stop being soft on his enemies, it would not be a bad thing. They moved quickly. David and Clark brought the remaining Kryptonians back to the moon to secure them. But when they landed on the barren, cold surface, the world engine floated there, silent and empty in the starless void. Several Kryptonians lay unconscious on the lunar ground, except 2 were missing. David frowned. Each Kryptonian's strength made escape a real danger. "What's wrong?" Clark asked. David scanned with his gravitational sense. His expression tightened. "Someone took advantage of our fight with Zod. 2 of them were taken." Clark was incredulous. "On the moon?" David nodded. The ship's internal hatches had been violently damaged, as if someone had broken in and searched for technology to steal. The main console bore the mark of an angry fist. The intruder had left with 2 unconscious Kryptonians, but hadn't managed to get what they were after. "For now, we need to recover the ship and the Kryptonians," David said. They brought the mothership and the captured Kryptonians back to the North Pole, and without stopping, flew home to reassure their parents. Jonathan and Martha Kent breathed a huge sigh of relief when their 2 sons returned safely. Hearing the whole story on top of seeing the headlines about Metropolis, the couple's hearts were heavy, but they comforted their sons, telling them they had done their best. "David, Clark, you both did your best," Jonathan said, squeezing their shoulders. After that brief respite, they returned to the North Pole base. Kryptonians were vulnerable not just to kryptonite, but to red solar radiation. A prison bathed in red sunlight wasn't high-tech at all. David ordered Atlantis to construct such cells, and within a day they had them. Fiora and the other captured Kryptonians were confined in the Fortress of Solitude, the giant exploration ship, each locked into its own red sun cell, gagged, limbs bound to iron frames, unable to communicate or coordinate escape. Jor-El's holographic projection watched the prisoners from a console, his expression complex. David studied the projection, surprised. Jor-El before them was an artificial intelligence, yet his personality and memories were so fully replicated that he felt like a continuation of the man himself. "Carl told me some things," Jor-El said quietly. "Please convey my thanks and respect to your parents, David. Even Laura and I couldn't have raised Carl any better." "I will, Uncle El," David replied. "I'll leave these Kryptonians in your care." "There are mechanical guardians aboard this ship," Jor-El added. "They will be sufficient to watch over them while they are powerless." "Father, 2 weak, unconscious Kryptonians were taken away," Clark broke in, urgency cutting through the calm. "They might have fallen into the hands of someone with ulterior motives, controlled or studied. We need to check the monitoring data from the other mothership." David's face went hard. The intruder had damaged internal hatches and left with 2 prisoners. Their motives could be sinister. Clark pressed the more immediate request again. They needed access to the other ship's logs to see who had broken in and where the 2 had been taken. Chapter 139. Do you think I care about that? The invasion led by General Zod was over. The alien armada had been driven off, its plan to wipe out humanity and terraform the planet thwarted by Overman and Superman. Still, Metropolis bore the cost. Thousands dead, whole neighborhoods in ruins. The battle decided the fate of the world, and suddenly everyone had an opinion about the 2 men who had stood in the eye of it. From start to finish, it was one giant fight that ruined ordinary people's lives. Aliens treated our buildings like toys. Where was any plan to destroy humanity? Someone shouted on a televised forum. Zod was demanding something called a codex. Maybe he stole it and ran to Earth to hide. Why should we suffer for his theft? Another argued. You didn't see how Zod kept threatening Overman and Superman. He threatened us too. How could he be a good guy? How many people has Superman saved since he arrived? Overman fought with him and helped drive those monsters away. I don't hate Superman or Overman, but this time it was Superman's species who came. Next time, whose enemies will show up? Superman is an alien. Nobody knows if Overman is one of us. Debate shows proliferated, pundits parsed motives, celebrities weighed in. The biggest question, what was Overman, dragged on. If Overman were human, some proposed, Earth could demand that he expel Superman and keep the planet safe with one familiar protector. Clark had learned to ignore the noise. David didn't care at all. He had other questions. Who had grabbed the two Kryptonians he and Clark had rendered unconscious during the fight with Zod and taken them while the heroes were occupied? Check the other mothership's data. Wait, hold on. In the Fortress of Solitude, Jor-El's intelligence, now an electronic consciousness, produced a small key in the shape of a seal. The fortress's mechanical guardian extended a steel tentacle and placed the key into Clark's hand. Insert this into the mothership's main control, Jor-El instructed. If you do, I'll be able to override its permissions. Okay, Clark accepted it. Thanks, Uncle El. They followed the plan. Once the key was in place, Jor-El projected a scene into the main control room. A bald man in green, high-tech battle armor, the kind the broadcasts had dubbed Zero Battle Armor, had flown through a hole cut by David and forced his way to the heart of the ship. The metal doors had been peeled off like cardboard beneath his hands. He'd tried to raid the ship's systems and failed. When the treasure he expected wasn't there, he'd smashed the controls in anger and left. Lex Luthor, Jor-El said. David's eyes narrowed. How did he get so strong? Did he augment himself with bionics? Clark guessed, but Jor-El's scan showed something else. The armor and mecha didn't make him a machine. The man moving inside the suit was flesh and blood. David frowned. Then he modified his biology. It made sense. Lex Luthor had been obsessed with human supremacy. His wars with Superman in the past had relied on tech, kryptonite, and cloned proxies. He had the money, drive, and resources to stop being merely human if he chose to. Jor-El closed his eyes, then invaded the global networks with the speed of a native Kryptonian mind living inside machines. Finding a human on Earth with Luthor's signature wouldn't take long. What did he want with the other Kryptonians? Clark asked. Experiments? Isn't he afraid they'll wake up and kill him? He most likely has learned your race's vulnerabilities, David said. Clark recalled how badly he'd been beaten in public, blood at the corner of his mouth, and realized Luthor had no shortage of clues. Clark's Green Lantern ring protected him against radiation, but those two captives were vulnerable. Gaining meteorite byproducts would be trivial for Luthor. Found him, Jor-El said. A coordinate blinked on the map, an underground facility on the outskirts of Metropolis. Jor-El hadn't had time to deal with the man before. David had other ideas. Let's finish him, David said, voice flat. In a bunker lab beneath a nondescript strip mall, Lex Luthor stood over two unconscious Kryptonians. Both had been sedated and injected with a meteorite-derived solution. Luthor, in a white protective suit, looked at them with hungry eyes. With these two, the plan will go faster, he murmured. He had collected meteorite remnants that weakened Kryptonians and, secretly, a small sample of Superman's blood from the battlefield. He intended to use it to clone superpowered servants, an army created to obey him. Cloning was illegal, immoral, forbidden by law, and to Luthor, those were reasons to proceed, not to stop. Cloning has immeasurable uses, he said to himself. The law only cripples us. He had tried before to force humanity upward with genetic programs that failed on his own genes. That had only whetted his appetite. He imagined himself in history's light. He thought of Alexander, of fortunes seized by assassination or audacity. If circumstances had been rearranged, if others had been removed, would a different name have endured? He told himself the ends justified the means. He had killed to prove it. He had used the Typhon project to graft strength into himself. Now his fingernails bore a silvery metallic sheen, able to slice through tissue as easily as a blade. He liked the feeling of control. He lifted a syringe and prepared to harvest a specimen. The bunker's special scanners painted the world in a gray map of life fields. Two signatures descended, one like a burning sun, the other a dense, contained beam of light shaped like a person. They found me, Luthor said, voice tightening. He glanced at the two specimens on the table and, with a thought of preservation, tore a weak arm from one of the sedated Kryptonians. His modified nails cut like shears, the arm chilled under his touch as he prepared to flee underground. If it had been only Superman, he might have stayed to parry and bargain. Overman changed things. Luthor had once wondered if Overman and Superman were of the same species. Zod's visit had not cleared that up. Overman's raw power made hiding impossible. The floor became like quick cement. Luthor's movements slowed. He tried to force his way free, to burrow away into the earth, but the ground shut around him like a jaw. Then, with a sound like tearing cloth, the bunker's ceiling exploded upward. Two figures loomed down into the hole. "You weren't subtle," Luthor said, half defiant, half impressed, as he and a chunk of the surrounding earth were lifted into the air. He smashed out of the dirt, bracing behind a shimmering force field. "Overman, Superman, I didn't expect you to find this place," he said, when the two landed. "You thought you could hide beneath our feet," David replied coldly. "You took people you had no right to, Luthor." Clark, using his vision, confirmed Luthor's altered biology. It was not armor or robot. It was a man who had remade himself. Earlier, Luthor had sheared a Kryptonian arm like a gardener plucking a leaf. Clark's anger flared. "Are you talking about the extraterrestrial war criminals who invaded Earth?" Luthor asked, slipping out of his protective suit to reveal a stark black outfit. He tossed aside the severed arm like refuse, wiped his hands with a pocket square, and laughed. "You say I took people. What law did I break? Unlawful imprisonment? Malicious bodily harm? Do aliens get Earth's protections?" Clark's fist tightened at the insult. Technically, many human laws did not explicitly extend to non-humans. Legality was a gray area. Luthor's smirk was sharpened by that ambiguity. "I didn't come here to listen to your sophistry," David said. He raised his hand and folded space. A gravity field seized Luthor out of midair and slammed him to the rocky ground. The bunker floor collapsed in a web of fractures. The pressure increased until earth and stone compressed like iron. Luthor's cheekbones creaked under the force. His modified body bulged, then swelled, trying to resist, his size increasing as he used every trick he had. Even with his enhancements, he couldn't break free. "You!" Luthor ground out through clenched teeth. "You're attacking me, an innocent citizen. You don't get to break the law." He smiled and tapped his chest. A faint red light blinked there. "Let me remind you," he said, voice full of venom. "When I reached for my pocket square, I activated the miniature camera sewn to my shirt. Everything you two are doing is being broadcast live to the world." Clark saw the camera and instinctively wanted to stop them both. Their actions were borderline. Without legal sanction, they could be accused of assault or worse. He moved to intervene. "Do you think I care about that, Luthor?" David said, utterly unmoved. The sentence hung in the air like frost. David's expression was cold as the North Pole. Above them, the wires, the cameras, the court of public opinion, none of it mattered when someone had kidnapped and butchered innocents for experiments. The battle between law and morality had begun, but David's choice was already made. Chapter 140, Killing Luthor and the Cosmic Signal. The live feed from a new TV channel cut off abruptly. "What just happened? I thought I saw Superman and Overman questioning someone. Lex Luthor? Looks like he's holding the aliens who attacked Earth." People checked their phones one after another and sent messages full of shock, excitement, and doubt. "I just found out aliens aren't protected by law. Does that mean aliens on Earth have no human rights?" On the other hand, Luthor is human and protected by law. So Superman and Overman are breaking the law? Someone said, unsure how to react. The screen went black. Did Overman make a move? He doesn't seem to share Superman's reverence for the law. He doesn't care if he breaks it. The broadcast from a TV station owned by the Luthor Group had gone dark, and the sudden silence only made speculation louder. In the bunker, the camera itself had been crushed under the strain of the fight. Luthor had been lifted off the floor by an invisible force, squeezed as if by several mountains, his bones creaking under unbearable pressure. He glared at David and spat through clenched teeth. "Do you think you can crush me like a bug? What if I can control gravity?" Lex had dozens of powers at his disposal and could improvise new ones, and electricity shot from his eyes as his body reshaped into a humanoid form of crackling current. He floated in the air, looking down at David with contempt. Can you even control me in this form? David frowned. Gravity restraints were useless against a being of pure current. Where there is mass, there is gravity. Electric current is the directional flow of electrons. Electrons have mass, but it's negligible. Luther lifted a hand and unleashed a bolt of electricity that could melt steel. It scorched the air and slammed into David. You want to affect me in this state? Disable me? Talk to me when you can tear the earth apart with a flick of your wrist. You're right. David said nothing else. As Luther's dazzling current struck, David stayed still and absorbed it in an instant, letting out a faint sigh. The attack was weak compared to the battles David had faced. Ares, Ocean Master Orm, Zod, and it reminded him of fighting metahumans back in Smallville. He remembered Luther's obsession with a down-and-out scientist who'd studied meteorite fragments. Not surprisingly, he thought, many of Luther's abilities probably came from Smallville, people mutated by kryptonite radiation. Having guessed the source of Luther's powers, David raised his palm. A torrent of scorching purple cosmic energy tore across the sky and slammed into Luther. The electrical form that made up his body was annihilated. Luther howled and was hurled backward by the impact. In his current state, Luther had escaped David's gravity manipulation, but this form also negated most of his other powers. He'd effectively given up 99% of his abilities to dodge that one constraint. There was no better option. At least this way, he could still resist. Stabilizing himself, Luther tore through the bunker and ripped out a thick cable, siphoning the stored power of the entire experimental facility. His body swelled as he absorbed the current. 3 meters, 10, 15. By the time he stopped growing, he was 100 meters tall, a mountain of living electricity, swinging gargantuan fists at Clark and David. You alien vermin! This is the world of humans. He was a theatrical, dangerous show of power, but Clark moved like a bullet, slipping through Luther's chest with brutal speed. A huge hole punched through the current giant's torso, his back arched and his eyes bulged. He lashed out again. David caught the fist, which dwarfed his own body, and the absorption ability that dwelt in him activated like an energy black hole. Luther's current was rapidly siphoned away. He deflated like a punctured balloon and began shrinking. With a wave of telekinesis, Luther tore a corner from the bunker and sent tens of tons of reinforced concrete hurtling toward David. David fired heat vision, slicing through the debris. Every ounce of current Luther had drawn into himself poured into David and was absorbed. Luther's enormous frame collapsed back down to human scale. David didn't let him go. No, no! Luther screamed as he dwindled. He widened his eyes and launched one last psychic blast, a concentrated attack that could reduce tens of thousands to gibbering idiots in an instant. The blast hit David like a wave against an immovable dam and had no effect. David's eyes remained icy and untroubled. Superman, are you going to let him kill me? Luther cried, playing the only card he could, their shared history and Clark's compassion. He appealed to the man he had always sought to manipulate and destroy, hoping Clark's kindness would save him. Clark's fists clenched. He struggled visibly, the conflict clear on his face. Think about what Luther nearly did in Metropolis last time, David said quietly, deliberately. Clark's movement faltered. The memory came back. Luther had once used Clark's own sense of responsibility against him, fouling up a high-speed train loaded with thousands of passengers and rigging a situation to exhaust Clark until he collapsed, making him an experiment for the military. Clark had stopped that train, but the thought of the thousands of civilians used as bait gnawed at him. He had almost rushed forward, but he pulled up short. Letting someone as unscrupulous as Lex Luthor live posed a different kind of threat. Don't forget what you owe this city, David continued. The reminder of Metropolis, just recovering from Zod's devastation, unsettled Clark. He grit his teeth and slowly turned away, avoiding the final scene. As the last of Luthor's stolen current was drained, his cheeks hollowed and his breaths grew shallow. Despair widened his eyes. No. His voice grew thin. Is that your last will and testament? David asked coldly. The usual tricks, schemes to let Luthor live at the edge of death, didn't work this time. Luthor's last words came oddly calm. He murmured a line by Heine, a weak, eerie smile ghosting across his face. Alexander has been remembered by the world for 1,000 years. I wonder if 1,000 years from now the world will remember me, Lex Luthor. He fixed his gaze on David and Clark until his head drooped. I'm going into the night, but the name Lex Luthor will not fade into silence. David moved. A blast of purple cosmic energy from his hand obliterated the remainder of Luthor's body. He did not want an intact corpse left behind to become tabloid fodder or to terrify Jonathan and Martha if they saw it. He also wanted to prevent any possibility of Luthor faking his death or using residual cells to revive himself. Luthor had mastered biological alteration. David wanted no trace of him left. Clark hovered, conflicted. He had watched, essentially, as his brother executed a man, even if that man had been a threat, and he felt the moral weight. Luthor's dying line had a ring of menace. Was it a hint at a grander scheme? A plan to guarantee his name lived on in infamy? Clones? David murmured. The idea came to him from the comic legends of Luthor. The man had always dabbled in cloning. He'd cloned beings, even perfected versions of the son of Krypton. Bizarro was one such product. In some worlds, Luthor had transferred his consciousness into cloned bodies to evade death. It seemed unlikely, though, that Lex had managed the most advanced techniques. More likely, he'd left a contingency plan, automated cloning facilities waiting to activate at his death to make sure the name Lex Luthor endured. It's a ridiculous hope, David said. Even if replicas were produced, Jor-El monitored the globe and could detect any unauthorized cloning. Unless Luthor's copies avoided all detectable tech, which was improbable, they would be caught and stopped. If not, they could simply be eliminated again. After dealing with Luthor, David and Clark took the two recovered Kryptonians to the Fortress of Solitude at the North Pole and secured them. They then returned home to the Kent farm to rest for a few days. College was about to start, an event that would be momentous for most families. At the Kent farmhouse, the conversation went differently. What did you say? You're taking a leave of absence? Martha spat coffee across the table in disbelief, having just come in from feeding the chickens. Calm down, Martha. Let them explain, Jonathan said, trying to soothe his wife. He looked at his two sons and, with a quiet, implicit acceptance, supported them. What are you thinking? Are you serious? He asked. Dad, you don't seem surprised, David said, faintly puzzled. Most parents would be panicked if their children, raised carefully, suddenly dropped out of college. Jonathan smiled wryly. Son, after you two have saved the world more than once, I've learned to be a bit less surprised. Clark rubbed the back of his head and spoke seriously. I don't think college can help me. It would take too much time. He could absorb the academic content in a fraction of the time. If it were only about a diploma and a career, Clark might already have been the nation's highest-paid football star at 18. He needed time to let Superman protect Metropolis, a city still recovering, and there was a sting of guilt in his eyes. Same here, David agreed. He wasn't drawn to the college routine. He couldn't tell their parents the truth. He had responsibilities to two ancient civilizations and needed to maintain their stability, which took time and emotional energy. Jonathan and Martha, understanding more than most, agreed after a moment. They worried only about nosy neighbors or relatives, not about their son's choices. They were just about to settle into a leisurely afternoon when the Fortress of Solitude pinged with a message from Jor-El. David and Clark read the warning together. Zod had drawn attention. Someone in the universe, using advanced technology, had begun scanning for the signal of the Kryptonian ship, and that search vector was heading toward Earth.